Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into a crate. Not just any crate. This one's lined with a few crumbs of stale baguette, a suspicious pillow, and the hopes of a man with questionable judgment, and a dream that would not fit in any overhead compartment. That's right, tonight you're about to experience life from inside the box. Literally. You're in France, somewhere between the later years of the 1800s and the early 1900s. Historians still argue whether it was pre-electric fan or post-parcel reform. But in any case, the fashion is dashing, the postal regulations are baffling, and one Frenchman, let's call him Monsieur Jacquin, is about to do something that no rational adult with access to a ferry would attempt. He's going to mail himself to London. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Are you in bed already or still winding down? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins, as many poor decisions do, with an early morning stretch and an excess of confidence. You wake up in your tiny Parisian apartment. The ceiling is cracked, your mattress is too short for your legs, and outside, the sound of a horse sneezing onto cobblestones convinces you, today is the day. Today, you will become male. You're tired of the bureaucracy. The ferry tickets are too expensive. Customs takes forever. Your friend in London has already offered to host you, but getting there is the problem. Train? Too complicated. Carriage? Too much chit-chat. Walking? Let's not. No, instead, you do what any slightly eccentric man with a half-finished engineering degree and access to wooden crates might do. You build a box, climb inside it, and slap on some postage. Your name is Lucien Jacquin, by the way, though you rarely use it aloud. You prefer simply Jacquin, like a brand name nobody remembers how to pronounce. The crate is modest, about the size of a laundry chest, which makes sense because you got it from a laundress who owed you a favor. You've spent 3 nights reinforcing the corners with bent nails and questionable glue, adding tiny breathing holes that double as periscope slots, though in practice, they just let in drafts. Inside, the accommodations are rustic. A pillow thin, goose feather, slightly damp. A flask of weak broth. 2 crusty rolls you plan to chew slowly. And perhaps the most vital feature of your voyage, a folded page from a scientific journal featuring a diagram titled, Respiration Within Enclosed Volumes. You hum to yourself while taping up the seams. It's not fear, it's excitement. Or possibly indigestion. You drag the crate to the back alley. It's heavier than expected, especially once you climb inside and try to wiggle your legs into a reasonable position. Your knees bump your chin. The lid creaks ominously. You've left a small handle loose, so you can yank it closed from inside, and you do so with a flourish. Pitch black. Now begins the waiting. You've prearranged a young cousin, Felix, age 12, payment, a warm croissant, to deliver you to the post office. His job is simple. Tell the clerks it's a shipment of preserved cheese samples for the Anglo-French Culinary Society. You hear his hesitant footsteps. A grunt. A drag. And off you go, your crate skimming the cobblestones like a very confused tortoise. Time is meaningless in the box. Could be 15 minutes. Could be forever. At one point, someone sets something heavy on top of you, a sack of flour, perhaps? A taxidermied boar? Your imagination is already spiraling. Eventually, a jolt. Then a voice. What's this? Smells like pastry. There's a muffled laugh. Paper crinkles. Cheese samples, it says. London bound. Good enough. A thud, and then movement. You're on the road. The crate rocks gently, like a cradle designed by someone with a vendetta against smooth travel. Your thoughts wander. To London, of course. To your friend Henri, who agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to collect you if this madness actually works. You imagine him reading your letter. Dear Henri, please meet one sealed crate at Victoria Station. Contents, one slightly crumpled Frenchman. Of course, there are contingencies. You've left a tiny folding knife in your left boot, just in case you need to escape mid-journey. You've also, perhaps too optimistically, packed a small silk cravat for your grand reveal. Historians still argue whether anyone truly mailed themselves before you. Some point to an Irishman in the 1700s who tried something similar with a barrel and a donkey. Others claim you were inspired by a German escape artist known only as the human parcel. Either way, you suspect your method is the first to involve both lavender oil and chicken wire. The ride continues. You smell horses. Hear wagon wheels. The occasional shouted insult, which may or may not be directed at your crate. Your back begins to ache. Your foot falls asleep. You start to wonder, did you punch enough air holes? Did you pack too little water? Was this, in fact, the worst idea you've had since that time you tried to make toast using a gas lantern? Still, there's no turning back now. The crate is moving. You are en route. You are, quite literally, committed to the bit. And as you bump along the uneven road, the rhythm of the cart rocks you gently, almost tenderly, like the universe itself is reluctantly indulging your madness. Just as your eyelids begin to droop, the crate lurches to a stop. Loud voices. Something thuds nearby. A braying sound. Goats? You sigh. Of course. You've been rerouted. You wake to the unsettling realization that one of the breathing holes now smells unmistakably like hay and goat. Not in the abstract way hay sometimes smells when it wafts through an open countryside window, but in the way it smells when it's actively being chewed by something four-legged and judgmental. There's a thud above you. Something shifts. A bleat pierces the air so close you momentarily question whether you've been reincarnated mid-journey as a livestock feed sack. You wriggle slightly in your crate, which has stopped moving. The bumps, the rolls, the cartwheel creaks, they're gone. Instead, a dull stillness surrounds you, accompanied by the sound of cloven hooves shuffling across a wooden floor. You piece it together slowly. You've been offloaded. Not at a customs station. Not onto a channel ferry. But into what you suspect is a livestock pavilion. You don't panic. Not yet. You're French, after all. You've waited in longer queues for worse things. But the fact that you're now, apparently, surrounded by goats means something has gone wrong. Or at least very sideways. You squint through a knothole near the lid. Just enough light creeps in to offer a grim view, straw everywhere, a rusted pitchfork leaning against the wall, and the shadowy silhouette of something munching nearby. You groan softly and reposition your weight. It's not easy. Your legs are cramping. One of your socks has migrated halfway off your foot, and it's too tight in the crate to fix it without launching a full-body wrestling match against the sides. You decide to live with it. From outside, a voice. This one don't bleat. A pause. Then another voice, older, wheezy, quietest goat I ever met. Maybe it's sick? Or dignified. They laugh. You take a deep breath, then remember your current atmosphere is 40% goat, and stop doing that. A loud creak suggests a barn door is opening, letting in a shaft of brighter light. Something clatters. A rooster crows, because why not? Apparently, this crate tour now includes poultry. You brace yourself. A solid knock lands on the lid. Then a voice, much closer. What's in this one again? A paper ruffles. Says here, cheese samples. A beet. Smells like laundry and regret. Then it's French cheese. You would laugh if you weren't mildly terrified. You contemplate knocking back, maybe offering a polite bonjour through the wood, but ultimately decide against it. Drawing attention is not currently in your top 5 strategies. You stay still. Somewhere behind you, a chicken flaps aggressively, then hops onto your crate. The vibrations are unmistakable. She clucks once, with profound suspicion, and then begins scratching at the wood like she's auditioning for the world's smallest fencing team. You imagine her pecking a hole right above your forehead. Would she be startled by your face? Or just indifferent? Chickens, after all, are not known for their nuanced reactions. Historians still argue whether livestock and postal freight ever shared temporary storage in rural transit points like this. Some insist there were rules, that such mixing of categories would have been prohibited. Others, clearly more fun at parties, point to anecdotes of stagecoaches pulling double duty, carrying both goods and animals on overland routes to maximize cost efficiency. You, however, are not currently interested in academic consensus. You're interested in getting out of this barn, preferably before you become a perch. Eventually, mercifully, the clucking stops. The chicken hops off with a small flutter. You hear footsteps again, these ones purposeful. Boots crunching straw. A latch clicks. A cart squeaks. You feel yourself being hoisted again, jostled as your crate is loaded back onto something mobile. A cart? A wheelbarrow? A deeply confused donkey? Doesn't matter. You're moving. This time the ride is bumpier, less predictable. You sway, tip, and at one point slide partially onto your side. You try not to panic. The crate groans under your weight. Another voice mutters, "Hope this is the last of 'em." Yes, you think. Please let me be the last goat. At some point, you drift into a half-sleep. It's a shallow doze, full of confusing barnyard dreams and a nagging worry that your remaining flask of broth might be leaking. When you wake, it's to the sharp smell of hay. But different hay. Drier. Cleaner. You think, possibly wishfully, that you're back on a proper mail cart. You crack your back as best you can. Twist one leg into a better angle. Then hear the glorious clink of a metal mail hook snapping shut. A postal voice calls out, "Next stop, Calais." Progress. Your journey is back on track. Though you're now covered in straw and slightly goat-scented, you're en route to the coast. And if your calculations are correct, and you did take 2 semesters of postal logistics at university, you'll be on a channel ferry by nightfall. You sip your broth carefully. It's lukewarm and metallic, but you toast the moment anyway. "Cheers," you whisper. To international postage and dumb courage. As the cart bumps toward Calais, you find yourself oddly relaxed. The chaos of the goat fair, the poultry interrogation, the sideways detour, it all fades into a sleepy rhythm of hooves and wooden wheels. You doze again, comforted by the gentle sway and the faint, salty scent of sea air growing stronger with every mile. The cart lurches and rolls to a stop, jarring you awake just as a ray of late afternoon light slants through the breathing hole and glints off the inside of your now thoroughly travel-worn crate. You blink, or at least you try to, since blinking in total darkness feels more like a polite eyelid gesture to yourself than a functional action. There's a hum outside. Not the gentle, pastoral kind you heard in the goat fair. This one buzzes, men shouting over crates, carts clanging into place, the clatter of hooves and shoes and something wet slapping the cobblestones. You sniff. Fish. Salt. Damp rope. Congratulations, you've reached the port of Calais. The scent is overwhelming, a briny, pungent cloud that confirms you're near the sea, or at the very least, a pile of heavily sweating cod. You listen closely. A seagull lets out a shriek that can only be described as judgmental. Somewhere, a sailor curses, likely over a dropped boot or a full chamber pot tipped at an inconvenient angle. Your box is offloaded again with a bump that knocks your head gently into the top panel. You mutter something unsavory in French, then apologize to no one. You are carried, or more accurately dragged, onto what you presume is the loading ramp of a ferry. A creaky one, judging by the wooden planks underfoot and the faint vibrations you now feel humming through the crate. Someone coughs. You hear the low grumble of French customs inspectors, performing what may or may not be their actual duties. A boot kicks your crate gently. "Still more cheese?" one voice asks. Another chuckles. "If it's cheese, it's gone bad." You frown inside the crate and make a mental note to write a strongly worded letter, possibly anonymously, if you survive this trip with your dignity and kneecaps intact. Still, there's no prying. No knocking. No dramatic reveal. Just the soft clang of chains as the boat begins to sway and push off from shore. You brace yourself. The channel is not known for its grace. Today, apparently it's in a particularly expressive mood. The ship rocks once, subtle. Then again, less subtle. Your crate slides an inch. Then two. You bump into a wall. You suspect you're not secured in the cargo hold so much as casually wedged between a barrel of salted fish and a case of boots. A sailor above you groans. That cheese box again, keeps sliding. Well, tie it down. Can't. The rope's wet. Then sit on it. A pause. Then, unmistakably, a sailor plunks himself down directly on top of your crate. He shifts his weight. Whistles a sea shanty in the key of board. You can feel every bone in your back protest. He's heavier than expected. Possibly full of fish stew. You close your eyes and breathe shallowly, trying to pretend you are a stone. A small, brave, deeply flattened stone. The sea swells. The crate tilts again. Water sloshes somewhere nearby. You resist the urge to scream as a single drop of something cold seeps through a knot in the wood and lands squarely on your nose. Of course, you'd packed a cloth. A fine bit of linen. But it's now wrapped around your elbow in a failed attempt to cushion the spot that's beginning to blister from your awkward positioning. Your teeth chatter, not from fear, but from the chill. The air inside the crate has taken on a dampness that coats your lungs in the flavor of old rope and regret. Historians still debate whether such postal crossings included dedicated freight space for odd-sized items like your crate. Most say no. Cargo was cargo, and if it didn't moo or explode, it probably got wedged wherever it fit. Others suggest some ferry crews had designated corners for fragile or fragrant packages. You clearly didn't qualify for either. Hours pass. The ferry groans like a tired cow. The sailor above you eventually grunts, shifts his weight again, and mutters something about needing to relieve himself. You whisper a prayer to all postal deities that he dismounts before doing so. He does. Your crate tips slightly as he leaves, but it doesn't fall. Small victories. You take a sip of your now body temperature broth. It tastes faintly like sawdust. You chew a corner of stale roll and try not to think about where you are, or how you're ever going to explain this to anyone. In the distance, you hear a bell. Then another. Dock sounds. British ones. You can tell by the voices, clipped, deliberate, occasionally muttering quite right even when clearly nothing is right at all. You've made it to England. Dover by the sound of it. Your heart thuds with cautious optimism. The boat clunks against the dock. You hear crewmen yelling, anchors being dragged, and crates, possibly friends of yours now, being hefted and tossed onto ramps. Yours is no exception. With a grunt, two men haul your box over the side and onto solid ground. You hit with a dull whomp, jarring your tailbone and causing your flask to slosh indignantly. Cheese box smells like socks, someone comments. It's French. That's normal. They laugh. You do not. Still, they wheel you into a customs shed without question. No one opens you. No one pokes. No dogs sniff. You are simply a box among other boxes, exiled to a quiet corner that smells faintly of pipe smoke and overboiled tea. You breathe in cautiously, savoring the first dry air in hours. Your knees hurt. Your back creaks. But you're on British soil. You are, in all technical senses, an international traveler. You lie there in your crate, listening to a conversation about the merits of marmalade, and allow yourself a smile. You've crossed the channel. In a box. And nobody, not the postal clerks, not the sailors, not even the curious goat, has figured you out. You awaken to the sound of paperwork. Not the fun kind, if there is a fun kind, but the dry, shuffling, ink-smudged murmurs of two clerks arguing over a form they've definitely never seen before. Well, it says cheese here, but the manifest has it as grain samples. Grain? From France? Exotic French grain, maybe? They do odd things with wheat. You stifle a cough. The air inside your crate is beginning to smell like a forgotten sock drawer. Your broth is dangerously low, and your last crust of bread now resembles a medieval artifact rather than food. But you remain motionless. Because motion, in your case, leads to discovery. And possibly fines. Or worse, paperwork. A cart rumbles underneath you. The wooden floor vibrates slightly. You're on the move again. You don't know it yet, but this next leg of the journey will make your earlier goat-based misadventure seem almost reasonable. The cart you've been loaded onto is not, as one might hope, heading to a post depot in London. No, you are now part of a delivery mix-up involving a shipment of grain sacks bound for a modest flour mill just outside of Maidstone. Your destination has not just shifted, it's taken a full detour through the world of British agricultural logistics. You overhear one of the porters say, "Put the French grain with the rest. Manager'll sort it tomorrow." Ah, the soothing competence of delegation. The next few hours pass in slow motion. The cart rolls past hedgerows and the occasional buying sheep. From inside your crate, you get only the soft rhythms of hoofbeats and the creak of wheels. You pass what might be a bakery, judging by the heavenly scent of rising bread. Your stomach growls in protest, offended that you've spent days in a box while bread lives a better life just beyond reach. Historians still argue whether British postal mishandling was frequent during this era. Official records insist on strict order. But letters went astray. Parcels vanished. One crate famously arrived 2 years late, containing a wax model of Napoleon and a still-melting wedge of camembert. So perhaps, by those standards, you are doing quite well. Eventually, the cart stops. A door opens. You hear a long, dramatic sigh. Then, why is there a box labeled cheese in the grain delivery? You are lowered gently to the floor with all the care of someone handling an unwanted birthday gift. A latch clicks. Footsteps fade. You are alone again. You listen to the silence of the mill. Soft drips. A distant creak. The occasional rustle, possibly mice evaluating your structural integrity. You doze. Not comfortably, but with the resolve of someone who has accepted the emotional curveball of life inside wooden rectangles. At some point, someone opens a window. Fresh air drifts in, cool, earthy, with just the faintest whiff of cow. You're thankful for the ventilation, if not the view. When morning comes, a flurry of activity explodes around you. Sacks thump onto the ground. A broom scratches across the floor. Boots stomp near your head. A young voice says, "This box doesn't belong here." An older voice responds, "Too clean to be grain. Must be one o' those misrouted parcels. Should we check it?" "Nah. Just tag it and send it back to Dover." You hear them scribble something. Tape is applied somewhere near your foot. You consider screaming, but it seems undignified. Instead, you clear your throat, a soft, hesitant sound. Silence. Then a shout. "Did that box just cough?" You brace yourself. A hammer clangs nearby. Then, terrifyingly, silence again. You wait, imagining the young man running out of the room and the older one simply pretending none of this is happening. After several minutes, footsteps return. "Right," the older voice says grimly. "Let's poke it." The crate shifts. You hear the unmistakable sound of a crowbar. The lid creaks. Light, pure, glorious, late morning light, floods in, blinding you for a moment. You squint up at two faces peering down in abject confusion. There's a long pause. "Hello," you say, blinking politely. Another pause. "Why, are you in a box?" the older man asks, in a tone that suggests he's prepared to cancel the rest of his day if necessary. You clear your throat again and sit up, slowly, with the grace of someone unfolding themselves after a long nap inside an undersized wardrobe. "I am part of an experiment," you explain. This is technically true. An experiment in poor planning and human stubbornness. I was meant to arrive in London. The younger man looks like he might faint. The older one pinches the bridge of his nose. "Well," he says slowly, that seems unlikely at the moment." They help you out of the crate. You stretch. Every joint pops. Your knees audibly complain. But the sun is warm, the floor is solid, and you are, at long last, upright. The mill is rustic. Dust dances in golden shafts of sunlight. A cat watches you from a beam overhead, deeply unimpressed. You take a long sip from a mug someone mercifully offers. Lukewarm tea, but it tastes like luxury. You explain your story, in fragmented pieces, between gulps of hydration and uncomfortable stretching. They listen. Both men are expressionless. When you finish, the older one says, "We'll call someone." It's not dramatic, But it is, for you, the most beautiful phrase ever spoken. You are recrated, gently this time, and tagged with an apologetic note scrawled in pencil. Urgent, French. Not cheese. Possibly a man. You hear laughter as the cart rolls again. Your route has been corrected. You're heading, finally, to the right depot. From there, it's just a few dusty miles to London. You lie back, close your eyes, and allow yourself to believe that this might actually work. The cart rocks along a smoother road now. You can tell by the gentle sway and the blessed absence of your head banging into the crate walls every 15 seconds. Compared to the clattering chaos of the barn, the salt-slick ferry, and that brief flirtation with becoming a goat, this leg of the journey feels almost luxurious. Your limbs still ache. Your back is plotting revenge. But at this point, you've accepted discomfort as a loyal traveling companion. Outside, you hear the faint clink of reins, the low murmur of carriage wheels, and, most promisingly, the muffled clang of a bell tower striking noon. You do the sleepy mental math. If your guesstimate is right, you're somewhere near the outskirts of London. The light filtering through your knothole looks slightly grayer than it did in Kent, and the occasional shout now has that distinctive bored yet urgent cadence of a London street vendor. You are close. There's a sudden jolt as the cart halts. A voice calls out, "Delivery for the sorting depot," followed by the rustle of paperwork and a gruff "Put it with the afternoon lot." You're lifted again, this time with significantly less ceremony. The crate wobbles as it's hauled onto a trolley. You can't help but notice it's being placed upside down. Your broth sloshes violently. The pillow shifts and smacks you in the nose. You are, once again, reevaluating your entire existence. Eventually, the jostling stops. You are deposited in a place that smells like ink, dust, and well-worn wool coats. A postal depot, at last. A clerk's voice echoes from somewhere nearby. Who logged this one? What's it marked as? Frenchman. Possibly not cheese. Oh, this must be that mystery crate. A pause. Why is it damp? You silently beg them not to explore that too deeply. There's only so much mystery broth and travel sweat one can explain away. There's a sound of boot steps growing louder, then the sudden screech of a chalkboard being updated. You're officially in the system now, possibly as a crate-shaped footnote. You imagine someone noting your weight as uncertain and contents as awaiting clarification. Historians still argue whether this depot, somewhere on the southern fringe of London, had the kind of oversight that would notice, much less rectify, a mislabeled box with a heartbeat. But judging by the idle chatter and clinking teacups, you're guessing today is not that day. Hours pass. The sorting depot is a beehive of activity, most of it not directed at you. Crates are shuffled, bags tossed, ink-stained fingers scurry across manifests. You, however, sit quietly, wedged between a box of teacups and a crate marked spare church kneelers, handle without grace. You doze. Then wake. Then doze again. Your internal clock is now powered entirely by biscuit crumbs and stubborn optimism. At some point, a peculiar conversation drifts in your direction. Is this the cheese box again? No, this one's alive. Don't be ridiculous. Cheese doesn't breathe. A pause. Well, some French ones do. You resist the urge to groan. Instead, you quietly adjust your cravat and hope your rescue is imminent. And then, like a miracle wearing a modest wool skirt, a new voice appears. It's warm, curious, feminine, and not at all convinced by your disguise. This one's making, breathing noises. Another clerk mumbles, probably mice. She knocks on the side of the crate. Politely. Not like the goat farmer. Not like the sailor who sat on you. This knock feels personal, investigative, perhaps even considerate. You freeze. A pause. Then the voice again, low and conspiratorial. If you're a man in there, and not a particularly adventurous brie, tap twice. Your heart leaps. You raise a finger. Tap. Tap. Silence. Then a soft, almost musical chuckle. I knew it. A moment later, you hear the unmistakable sound of hinges loosening and latches creaking. The lid lifts, just enough for a shaft of light and a very English pair of eyes to peek inside. The woman stares at you. You blink up at her, smile crookedly, and whisper, "Bonjour?" She stifles a laugh, pushes the lid open further, and hands you a chipped porcelain cup. "Tea?" You nod fervently, then attempt to unfold yourself with something like dignity. Your knees snap like firewood. Your back protests. Your entire body is a tightly coiled complaint, but you're out. Her name is Margaret. She's an assistant clerk, newly hired, fond of detective novels and crossword puzzles, and immediately fascinated by the man who mailed himself into her afternoon shift. You sit behind a stack of parcels, sipping weak tea, wrapped in a post office shawl someone mercifully draped over your crate. You explain your plan, slowly, because your jaw is still adjusting to movement. She listens with a mix of horror and glee. "Well," she says after a long sip, "you're either completely mad, or completely brilliant." You smile. "Is both allowed?" She grins. Instead of reporting you, which would be the reasonable, legally sound thing to do, Margaret suggests a solution. She knows a driver making a delivery run towards central London that afternoon. A kindly man. Speaks little. Asks less. Loves a good mystery. "If you can fit in among the luggage," she says, "you might just make it." You glance back at your crate, then down at yourself. Your trousers are wrinkled beyond hope. You smell like fairy decks and questionable decisions. But you're determined. "I can be a very convincing valise," you offer. Margaret fetches a luggage trolley, tags your crate with a new label, "Special Dispatch, handle with existential care," and helps you climb back in, this time with a small tin of buttered biscuits and a thermos of drinkable tea. The lid closes gently. She pats the top. "Next stop, your freedom." You whisper a heartfelt merci. The trolley rattles into motion. You exhale, close your eyes, and lean back against your faithful pillow, feeling more human than you have in days. London awaits. The wheels of the trolley glide more smoothly than any vehicle you've experienced so far. Granted, the bar is low, having just included a goat cart and a damp ferry bench beneath a sailor's posterior. Still, there's something almost elegant about this leg of your absurd postal pilgrimage. The depot fades behind you as the trolley rolls into the back of a large delivery wagon. You hear Margaret's voice again, muffled but certain, "Special dispatch for central delivery. Be kind to it, it's fragile in the soul." The driver, whose name you later learn is Bernard, doesn't ask a single question. He just grunts, adjusts the brim of his cap, and climbs up onto the driver's bench. A few moments later, the wagon creaks into motion. The gentle jingle of horse tack announces your departure from the outskirts and into the denser, louder maze of London. Inside the crate, you exhale slowly and gratefully. You've been in here so long now, the wooden interior feels like an extension of your body, like you've developed a carapace for emotional survival. Cramped limbs aside, the interior is now your quiet haven. You munch thoughtfully on a buttered biscuit Margaret had kindly provided, bless her, and listen to the rhythmic clatter of hooves on paving stones. You feel a bit like cargo royalty. It's the first time on this journey you haven't been mistaken for cheese, grain, or haunted furniture. The city sounds grow louder as you approach its center. London breathes in shouts and carriage wheels, the occasional bell from a newspaper boy, and the metallic creak of street lamps being lit. Through the crate's knothole, you glimpse the blurred edges of iron gates and gloved hands. Rain begins to tap against the wooden exterior, soft and steady, London's signature drizzle, always more whisper than storm. You've made it this far. But you know you're not quite there yet. Not until someone actually opens this box and says, "Ah yes, here's our Frenchman." The wagon lurches as it turns a sharp corner. Inside you roll slightly, bumping your shoulder into the crate wall with a muted thunk. You whisper an apology to no one in particular, and reposition yourself with the grace of a disgraced octopus. Then comes a sound you dread, a voice. "Oh, what's this big one?" "It's not on the manifest." Another voice. "That's Margaret's special dispatch." A pause. "Oh, right. The so fragile one. Just wheel it in. Delivery point's near the Thames." You're jostled again as two men heave you off the wagon and onto another trolley. This time, your crate creaks dramatically, as if it too is sighing in exhaustion. You begin to recognize the rhythms of the city beneath the wheels. Cobbles giving way to smoother lanes, the echo of footfalls in covered arcades, the long, hollow resonance that only comes from passing under a bridge. You're close. The air shifts. You can smell the Thames now, damp stone, river silt, and the faint perfume of coal smoke from nearby factories. Even the pigeons sound louder here, more opinionated. Eventually, the trolley grinds to a halt. You hear the click of boots on stone, then a muffled knock. Someone speaks to the driver, and though you can't make out the words, you understand the tone. The crate is being delivered. Right now. The last few seconds inside the box are oddly emotional. You pat the inside wall gently, like one does a faithful pet or a rented canoe that miraculously didn't sink. Then the lid creaks open. You blink against the sudden gray light. A thin drizzle mists your face. A man in a long coat and two short scarves stands over you, frowning. You're Lucian Jacquin? You nod. He squints. You arrived, in that? You nod again. A long pause. He opens his mouth, then closes it again. At last, he simply mutters, "Well, Henri did say you were unconventional." Henri. Sweet, flustered, tea-drinking Henri. You haven't seen him in months. The last time, he was still convinced one could survive on jam and toast alone. It's hard to picture him navigating this madness. But then again, it's hard to picture yourself here, soggy and cramped in a box in the heart of London. The man helps you up, steadying you as you step out like a disheveled jack-in-the-box. Your legs protest. Your arms swing slightly too wide as you regain balance. But you are out. He hands you a note, Henry's handwriting, unmistakably loopy and slightly panicked. Jacquin, if you've somehow made it here, I owe you a very large drink. Also, I booked you a room at the Cockspur Hotel. I assumed you need a bath and possibly a priest. You chuckle. Then cough. Then laugh again. Your host, Henry's friend, apparently, guides you to a modest carriage, where you sit on a real seat for the first time in what feels like centuries. Your back thanks you with several delighted pops. As you ride through the city streets, you finally see London not as a blur through a knothole, but with your own eyes, the sooty facades, the twinkle of shopfronts, the umbrella-toting pedestrians marching with purpose through the mist. It's overwhelming and oddly intimate. After days confined in silence, the city feels like a song at full volume. Historians still debate whether your particular journey was ever recorded in official ledgers. No proper postal record has surfaced, and no clerk ever took public credit. Some believe the story is apocryphal, an exaggerated tale told by sleepy postal workers at pub tables. Others insist the tale survives only in whispered footnotes, and the occasional awkward school report. You don't mind either way. You've survived. In a box. And now, at long last, you're in London. You arrive at the Cockspur Hotel just as the street lamps flicker into evening life, casting long puddled shadows on the cobblestones. It's the sort of place that wears its age like a well-pressed waistcoat, respectable but not flashy, with just enough chipped stone and polished brass to suggest that it's survived more than a few questionable guests. The doorman doesn't flinch when you appear, damp and smelling faintly of sawdust and bravery. He simply opens the door with a nod that says, "London has seen worse." Inside, the lobby is warm and fragrant, polish, old books, and the faintest whiff of baking scones. You nearly cry when someone offers you a towel. It's thick. It's soft. It smells like it's never been near a goat. "Room's ready," says the clerk behind the desk, without looking up. Then he pauses. Looks at you. Blinks. "Were you in a crate earlier today?" You blink right back, then smile. Only temporarily. He doesn't press. Just hands over a brass key and mumbles something about the bath being very hot, very deep, and very overdue. You float up the stairs as if your legs have finally forgiven you. The room is simple but immaculate, wooden floors, a sturdy bed, and best of all, A steaming porcelain tub large enough to forget everything that's happened in the last several days. You sink into it with a sigh that echoes faintly off the walls. Muscles unclench. Joints whisper thank you prayers. A bar of lavender soap slides through your fingers, and for a moment, you're convinced it's the most luxurious object ever created by man. You stay there until your skin prunes and your brain quiets. You have officially been boiled clean of goat. Later, wrapped in a thick robe and sipping tea from a cup that doesn't require rationing, you sit at the small writing desk and pull out your notebook. Your fingers twitch, eager to capture the absurdity of it all while the memories are still fresh and gently wrinkled. You jot down a title, On the Practical Inconvenience of International Self-Mailage. You consider drawing diagrams. A list of crate improvements. Maybe even a chart ranking European postal systems by ventilation quality. Historians still argue about what you did next. Some say you immediately returned to France and sold your story to a small newspaper. Others believe you stayed in London, using your tale as an icebreaker at dinner parties for the rest of your life. The truth is simpler. You go out for dinner. You choose a small restaurant tucked into a narrow alley, a place that smells like roasted duck and warm bread, with candles flickering in old brass sconces. The waiter raises an eyebrow when you order for two, but says nothing when you ask him to keep the second place setting filled with bread alone. You're just glad to sit at a table without wooden walls pressing into your kidneys. As you eat, you overhear conversations in half a dozen languages. London breathes around you, noisy, indifferent, alive. It feels like being let out of a tightly wound clock. You sip wine. You chew slowly. You appreciate every blessed bite. When the waiter brings dessert, a slice of tart so delicate it might qualify as a poem, he leans in. Begging your pardon, sir, were you in the crate? You lower your fork. Consider lying. Then sigh and nod. He beams. I thought so. News got here before you did. You're famous. Or infamous. Hard to say. You take a bite of tart, chew thoughtfully, and shrug. As long as they spell my name right. He disappears into the kitchen, and soon there's a quiet chuckle from the staff as they peek out one by one to see the Frenchman who mailed himself. You take it in stride. It's better than being mistaken for cheese. Back at the hotel, you collapse into the bed, soft, clean, gloriously horizontal. Your limbs stretch like they've never been allowed to exist in more than one direction. You exhale, slow and long, the kind of breath that tells your body it's finally allowed to sleep. But sleep doesn't come immediately. Your mind replays the journey, the crate, the sailors, the chicken interrogation, Margaret's knowing smile. It's not fear or regret that keeps you awake. It's the sheer ridiculous magic of it all. You start to write again, this time drafting a letter. Not to Henri. He'll get his own, full of exaggerated details and requests for more biscuits. This letter is for Margaret. You thank her for the tea, for the rescue, and for not turning you in. You add a doodle of your crate with a tiny French flag poking out the top. You sign it simply, Lucien, current address, above ground, thankfully. The letter is left with the front desk in the morning, addressed only to Margaret, with good sense and excellent tea instincts. London Postal Depot. You trust it will find her. Before you leave the hotel, you pass by a newspaper stand. The front page of the Evening Standard shows a sketch, clearly you, climbing out of a box, looking somewhere between heroic and extremely uncomfortable. The headline reads, Cheese crate yields man, French mail mystery solved. You laugh. The sketch has your nose entirely wrong. Still, it's nice to be noticed. You buy the paper. You fold it neatly and tuck it into your coat pocket, a memento of the time you gambled with postage and somehow won. As you walk down the damp London street, the city opens before you like a well-worn book, full of stories, full of noise, full of people who just might believe you when you say, well, once, I mailed myself to England. And if they don't? That's fine. You still have the crate. The next morning, you rise feeling, for the first time in days, vaguely human. Your body aches in the way that suggests it's no longer actively plotting revenge, just filing a quiet complaint with the Department of Limbs. You swing your legs over the edge of the bed, marvel at the absence of a wooden wall 6 inches from your face, and breathe deeply. No straw, no goat, no hint of cheese. Just crisp London air drifting through the half-open window. Outside, the city buzzes to life. Carriages rattle down wet cobblestone streets, their wheels cutting little symphonies into the puddles. A paper shouts about political things you won't pretend to understand. Someone is arguing about crumpets. You're still wearing Henry's borrowed clothes, slightly wrinkled but blessedly dry. You smooth them out, wrap your coat tight, and decide to take a walk, because after spending several days in a crate, your definition of luxury now includes things like standing up and moving in more than one direction. The streets of London stretch out before you in smoky threads, chimneys puffing, chimney sweeps shouting, carts stacked with fish, bread, umbrellas, and for some reason, a cage full of ferrets. You walk past them all, unnoticed, just another bundled figure navigating the grey tide of morning. But you have a plan. Not just any plan. A plan to return to the scene of the delivery. You need to find Margaret. Armed with nothing but her first name, your memory, and an amateur sketch you made of the depot's exterior on hotel stationery, you set out. You remember the shape of the window, the lopsided sign above the door, and the cat that was sleeping near a box labeled fragile, possibly bananas. It takes you 2 wrong turns, one polite conversation with a man who insists all postal buildings look the same, and a stop for a small apple tart that you absolutely do not regret, before you find it. The depot. Modest, brick-faced, windows slightly fogged with tea steam. Exactly as you remember it. Inside, the familiar clatter of mail sacks and clerks fills the air. Paper. Boots. Ink. Tea. A dog barks from somewhere improbably close to a filing cabinet. You hesitate at the door, feeling suddenly like a character in a particularly odd romance novel. But then you see her, Margaret, walking past the back counter, balancing a stack of parcels and humming something that might be a lullaby or just the sound of someone keeping themselves from screaming at bureaucracy. You push the door open with theatrical understatement. She glances up. Stops. "Oh good," she says. "I was hoping you hadn't been eaten by a hat maker." You smile. Tempting offers aside, I thought I should deliver my thanks, in person this time. She sets down her parcels. Wipes her hands on her apron. "And here I thought we were done delivering you." The joke lands just right. Dry, warm, familiar. You explain that you've decided to remain in London for a while. That Henri has spare space and even more spare jam. That you're considering writing about your misadventure. Nothing dramatic, just a few chapters of cautionary optimism. "Well, if you ever need a crate again," she says, "I'll make sure to line it with biscuits." You laugh. You ask if she'd like to meet for tea sometime. She says yes, of course, as long as it involves chairs and not shipping labels. Before you leave, she hands you something, a folded note sealed with red wax. "From one of the clerks," she says. "He says you owe the crate postage." Inside is a drawing of your crate with wings and a monocle, labeled Special Delivery, slightly eccentric contents. You decide it belongs on your wall. Historians still argue whether Margaret and you ever became more than postal conspirators. Some letters hint at visits to art exhibits, shared lunches near the river, and one particularly long conversation about whether hedgehogs could be successfully mailed. No one knows for sure. But the real joy is in the ambiguity, as any good historical footnote knows. You leave the depot lighter than you arrived. The rest of the day unfolds like an accidental holiday. You wander through Covent Garden, watch a man juggle flaming spoons, and buy a pocket watch you don't need but enjoy winding. You stop in at a bookshop, where you purchase a slim volume titled Travel Tales, mostly true, and make a mental note to submit a chapter. You pass by a group of schoolchildren pointing at a newspaper display in a shop window. Your name is there, Lucien Jacquin, in a headline promising French boxman speaks. The article, you later learn, misquotes you 6 times, invents a wife you do not have, and claims you ate your way out of the crate using only cheese. You're both insulted and flattered. You cut out the article anyway. That night, Henri insists on celebrating your survival with an elaborate dinner involving roast lamb, 2 puddings, and a bottle of wine so dusty it coughs when opened. You both laugh too much, remember too little, and toast far too often to things like international postage and the dignity of folding oneself in thirds. I still think you're mad, Henri says between bites. I prefer the term logistically adventurous. He grins. Whatever helps you sleep at night. It's nearly midnight when you step out onto his small balcony, sipping tea and watching the fog roll gently across the rooftops. London hums around you, muffled content, always a little too wet. You think of the crate, now folded up and leaning against the back of the hotel, likely repurposed as a bench or pigeon perch. You feel oddly nostalgic for it. That box carried you, protected you, and, for all its flaws, delivered you here. And here is not such a bad place to be. You stretch your arms wide into the night air. No lid. No walls. Just space and stars and the soft clink of a spoon against your teacup. You are free. And somehow, despite every splinter, bump, and questionable postal employee along the way, it was worth it. The following morning greets you with that peculiar London blend of drizzle and optimism. The sky's gray, but not too gray, and the rain falls in such a gentle mist that you can almost pretend it's helping your complexion. You take a brisk stroll with Henri to stretch your legs and reintroduce your limbs to the radical concept of sustained movement. Your friend chatters beside you, clearly still in disbelief that you made it to his doorstep via postal logistics. He keeps tossing glances at you like you're going to spontaneously crumble into a small pile of sawdust and cravat threads. Did you honestly never consider just taking the train? He asks. You give him a look. Fine, he says, holding up a hand. But you've got to admit, most people don't mail themselves internationally to avoid paperwork. Most people, you reply, lack vision. He chuckles, then pulls you into a small bakery where the pastries glisten with sugar like edible jewels. You bite 2, and then 2 more for walking, which is the best kind of justification. While munching on something that tastes like butter having a very good day, you drift through the city, eventually winding your way toward the Thames. The river is bustling, its banks lined with barges and hawkers, and the occasional gentleman trying to sell historically significant gravel. You politely decline. The air smells of whetstone, coal smoke, and hot chestnuts roasting nearby. You spot a woman feeding pigeons while simultaneously scolding them. 2 dogs attempt to chase each other but keep getting tangled in their leashes. And further along, a brass band plays a tune that wobbles charmingly between enthusiasm and lack of rehearsal. You lean against the iron railing, watching a tugboat putter beneath a bridge. It's hard to believe that just a few days ago, you were stuffed into a wooden crate, listening to the contemplative clucks of a hen who seemed suspicious of your breathing. It's moments like these that feel dreamlike. You're jolted from your reverie by a voice, young, nasal, excited. Mom, it's him! The crate man! You turn. A boy no older than 10 is pointing directly at you, clutching a copy of a newspaper folded awkwardly around the half-eaten biscuit. His mother looks mortified, but you smile. Bonjour, you say, bowing slightly. Please call me crate man. The boy beams. Did you really survive on nothing but cheese and hope? Mostly hope. And one particularly dry biscuit. He laughs, then, encouraged by your good humor, asks if you met any rats. Just one, you say. He was writing a novel. We didn't speak. The boy is delighted. His mother thanks you with a tight-lipped smile that says my child will never attempt this, right? As they walk away, you feel a tap on your shoulder. It's a journalist. Again. A different one this time, mustard-colored waistcoat, notebook already open, pen poised. He smells faintly of tobacco and ambition. Mr. Jacquin, he begins, do you have a moment to clarify a few details? There's some debate about the dimensions of your crate. Some papers say it was barely large enough for a dachshund. That's accurate, you reply, assuming the dachshund was trying to host a dinner party inside. He laughs, scribbles. And it's true you were rerouted through a goat fair? I'm afraid so. The goat was very professional about it. Fascinating. He jots more notes, then hesitates. And are the rumors true? That you're planning to write a book? You blink. The thought has been tumbling around your brain, but to hear it aloud makes it feel possible. Maybe, you say, something practical. A survival guide. Crate-based travel tips. Wonderful, he says. Readers love instructional absurdity. You part ways politely, and he scampers off toward a newsstand, already shouting something about a man in his box. You shake your head, amused, and return to walking. The city's pace is beginning to grow on you, less a rush than a meandering waltz with occasional umbrella collisions. The thought of writing keeps returning, like a cat you half-fed once that now considers you its landlord. That afternoon, you return to Henry's flat and sit at his writing desk, a haphazard construction of salvaged wood and academic ambition. You pull out your notebook and begin to sketch out chapter titles. Breathing holes and why you'll never drill enough. On the emotional toll of being sat on at sea. Customs officials and other theater critics. You don't know if it'll ever be published. But it feels good to write. To shape the chaos into something that might make someone laugh, or shake their head, or think, surely not. But what if? You break for tea and stare out the window. The rooftops are slick with rain, and a woman on the corner is holding a dog in one arm and a fish in the other, either of which seem pleased. Henri wanders in. Any progress? Possibly. I just finished outlining a chapter called Pigeons Are Not a Rescue Plan. He snorts. You're going to be insufferable at dinner parties. I was before the crate, Henri. He grins, then holds out a letter. This arrived for you. The envelope is neat, the handwriting familiar. It's from Margaret. You open it slowly. The note is short, just a few lines. Lucien. Still waiting on my promised diagram of proper crate padding techniques. Hope you're well. Let me know if your knees ever forgive you. Warmly, Margaret. You smile, fold the note carefully, and tuck it into the back of your notebook. You'll write her back, of course. Perhaps send along a sketch of the goat with a monocle, as a peace offering. The evening ends with a fire in the hearth, the rain ticking gently against the window panes, and the comforting weight of a blanket across your lap. You feel full, of tea, of gratitude, of strange little moments that somehow became a story worth telling. And somewhere beneath it all, just the faintest ache of adventure still lives in your legs. After all, once you've mailed yourself to London, the rest of life seems rather deliverable. You've been in London for just over a week when the invitation arrives. It's printed on thick ivory paper, the sort that smells faintly of money and good intentions. A wax seal you don't recognize, likely invented just for this occasion, stamps the envelope shut with more formality than seems reasonable. Henri slides it across the breakfast table with the wary reverence of a man handling a sleeping ferret. This came for you. It's from someone called Lord Barstow. You blink. Is that a real person? Henri shrugs. Either a peer of the realm, or a bakery item. You break the seal. Inside is a neat, looping script. Monsieur Jacquin, your unconventional method of travel has come to my attention. As chairman of the Society for Experimental Logistics and Unusual Conveyances, I would be delighted if you would attend our next gathering as a guest of honor. Dress code, semi-formal. Crates optional. Yours in fascination, Lord Alfred Barstow. You stare at the letter for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or frame it. I suppose you're famous now, Henri says, sipping his tea. Henri, I was famous the moment I survived a poultry inspection in Normandy. The gathering is scheduled for Friday evening, in a manner that you later learn is technically a former wine cellar that got out of hand. Lord Barstow, it seems, has a flair for the theatrical. You imagine the Society for Experimental Logistics and Unusual Conveyances, the SELOC, apparently, as a mixture of bored aristocrats, tinkerers, and men who've built gliders out of soup ladles. You decide to attend. You borrow a proper coat, polish your shoes, and even find time to trim your beard, which has developed a certain post office chic unruliness. Henri insists you wear a boutonniere. For the drama, he explains. You don't argue. The carriage ride to Barstow Manor is quiet and vaguely foggy, perfect ambience for either a gala or a mild haunting. The building itself emerges from the mist like a well-groomed loaf of stone, its windows flickering with golden light, its entrance marked by a red carpet and a butler who looks like he's been disapproving of things since 1832. Inside, you're greeted with the sort of warm grandeur that suggests someone owns a piano solely for decorative purposes. The guests are varied, inventors with ink-stained cuffs, duchesses who wear curiosity like a perfume, and at least one man with a live ferret perched on his shoulder. You're offered a drink by a footman so quietly efficient you half suspect he's part ghost. The champagne fizzes softly, and the chandelier above you twinkles in a way that makes you temporarily forgive all the bad lighting you've endured in wooden boxes. Then, from the crowd, a voice. "Is that our illustrious postman?" You turn and come face to face with Lord Barstow himself, a tall, owl-eyed man in a velvet smoking jacket embroidered with tiny dirigibles. His mustache is shaped like a paragraph. He grins and extends a hand. "Mr. Jacquin, you honor us with your presence. And by US, I mean all of Britain." You shake his hand. "Your letter mentioned crates were optional. I'm relieved." He chuckles. "Oh, some still bring their own. We had a gentleman last month who arrived in a barrel strapped to a wheelbarrow. Claimed it was a protest against rail schedules. Respectable, you say?" Barstow claps his hands once, loudly. The room quiets, almost magically. Glasses still clink, but voices hush. The chandeliers glow brighter, or maybe your nerves do. "Ladies and gentlemen," Barstow announces, "tonight's guest has traveled farther, and weirder, than any of us. Not by yacht. Not by train. But by crate." There's a ripple of delighted laughter and polite applause. "May I present, Monsieur Lucien Jacquin, France's most determined parcel." You're ushered to a small raised platform. Not a stage, exactly. More like an elevated corner typically reserved for string quartets or ambitious cheese boards. You step up, smile, and address the room. "Good evening," you begin. "I bring you greetings from Paris. And also from a box that I no longer wish to sit inside." Another wave of laughter, warm and indulgent. You tell them your story, not every bump and biscuit, but enough, the mislabeling, the goat fare, the customs officer who may have lit a pipe a bit too close to your air hole. You toss in a few French idioms, just enough to sound exotic, and close with a reminder that international relations are best conducted through kindness and properly vented packaging. They love it. Afterward, guests approach in waves. A woman with hair like sponge sugar tells you she once tried to post herself to Switzerland but got distracted by a pastry counter in Dijon. An elderly gentleman shares schematics of a suitcase-powered scooter. One particularly enthusiastic youth shows you a napkin sketch of an inflatable canoe designed to fit inside a teapot. You are among your people. Lord Barstow finds you again later, sipping port beside a taxidermy fox that looks more surprised than it has any right to. "Would you consider becoming an honorary member?" he asks. You hesitate. What does that involve? Mostly standing about looking mysterious, and attending dinners where no one eats anything shaped like a rectangle. You nod solemnly. "I believe I'm qualified." The evening winds down in a haze of velvet, sherry, and unsolicited engineering proposals. You leave with a pocket full of business cards, a cravat that now smells faintly of elderflower cordial, and a copy of Selig's quarterly journal titled Experiments in Movement, Volume 7, Why Not the Mail? Back at Henry's flat, you set the journal on the nightstand and collapse into bed, shoes off but everything else still buttoned in that happy, exhausted way one only experiences after unexpectedly becoming a society's mascot. As you drift to sleep, you wonder how many crates across the world currently contain someone with just enough madness to believe they, too, might be delivered somewhere better. And for the first time since leaving Paris, your dreams take place outside the box. You wake late the next morning, the kind of late that feels earned. Sunlight slants through Henry's sitting room window, catching the floating dust and golden rays, and for a moment you consider pretending to sleep just to extend the peace. But then your stomach growls with the ferocity of a marching band, and reality wins. Henri is already at the small kitchen table, surrounded by newspapers, buttered toast, and the unmistakable smell of triumph. "You're on page 2, he says without looking up. You blink at him. Of what? Everything. He slides a copy of the Illustrated London News across the table. And there you are, or at least a slightly exaggerated sketch of you, hair wilder, eyes wider, and for some reason you appear to be emerging from your crate with a heroic wind machine just off frame. The headline reads, "The man who mailed himself, Parisian eccentric or pioneer of personal post?" You sit down, take the toast he hands you, and begin reading. The article is surprisingly kind. It recounts your journey with a mix of amusement and admiration, quotes Lord Barstow generously, and even includes a sidebar listing tips for safe travel by parcel. Tip number 4, never trust a chicken with secrets. Other papers are more sensational. One claims you escaped from the crate using a hidden tunnel and help from an underground society of Victorian escapologists. Another insists you've begun a movement to abolish tickets and travel exclusively via shipping. I especially like the one that said you were smuggled into England as a rare cheese, Henri says, sipping his coffee. They described you as mild, sharp-eyed, and unexpectedly complex. Like a camembert with opinions. You laugh, mouth full of toast. I should be offended. But honestly, that's better than the usual passport photo. The papers keep arriving throughout the day. A reporter even leaves a note pinned to the door asking for an interview in or out of a crate, whichever is more authentic. And then, just after lunch, comes the knock that changes the tone entirely. You answer it, half expecting another journalist or perhaps an enterprising biscuit enthusiast. But the man on the doorstep is in uniform, an official-looking one, complete with a dark hat and brass buttons that scream bureaucracy with consequences. "Lucien Jacquin?" he asks. You nod. He clears his throat. "I represent His Majesty's Customs and Excise Department. I'm afraid we have questions." Henri hovers behind you like a nervous butler. "Is this about the cheese thing?" you ask. The man blinks. "No. It's about your entry into the country without documentation, clearance, or, well, doors. You're escorted, not arrested, not yet, to a tidy government office near the river, where a small committee waits in a room that smells faintly of wet ink and second-hand upholstery. They introduce themselves with crisp smiles and shuffle a stack of papers that looks alarmingly thorough. One begins. "Mr. Jacquin, you do understand it is not standard practice to mail oneself across international borders, yes?" You nod. "Yes, that is rather the point." Another chimes in, adjusting her pince-nez. "There are concerns about safety. Regulations. The message this sends to others." You try not to smirk. "That you, too, can become an oddly shaped envelope?" No one laughs. Not even a chuckle. You swallow. For the next hour, you are asked a parade of questions, about your intentions, your route, your breathing technique. They ask about the goat fair. You tell them honestly. They look skeptical. Finally, one of them sighs and leans back in his chair. "The problem is, Mr. Jacquin, there's no precedent." You raise an eyebrow. "Is that not, in itself, the charm?" He doesn't smile. But the woman beside him does. A little. They eventually reach a compromise. You are not to be fined, largely because no one can figure out what to fine you for. You did not technically break a law, though you came very close to breaking several from different departments, none of which coordinate well enough to agree on what you did wrong. However, you are placed under a gentle restriction: no further travel by crate within His Majesty's realm without written permission and at least one visible label. You accept. On the way out, one clerk quietly hands you a document labeled Form 17B, Application for Crate Transit Clearance, Experimental. At the bottom, someone has penciled in, "Love the story. Please be careful next time." Back at Henry's flat, you're met with silence. He's asleep in the chair, a book draped over his face, a teacup gently tipping toward catastrophe on the armrest. You rescue the cup, cover him with a blanket, and sit down to write. This time, it's not in your notebook. It's on proper paper, with a new pen, and the faint scent of responsibility. You begin drafting your lecture. Lord Barstow has invited you to speak at the next select meeting, a full presentation. You're to recount the technical aspects of your journey, share your postage philosophy, and propose guidelines for future human freight hopefuls. You've titled it, Crates and Consequence, a gentleman's guide to mildly reckless shipping. You write until the light fades and the fire burns low. You sketch diagrams, propose breathable materials, and list things not to store in crates with yourself, including goats, eggs, and the entire works of Voltaire, because they get heavy fast. That night you lie in bed and marvel at how quickly an absurd decision can become a reputation. You were just a man avoiding paperwork. Now you're something else. A cautionary tale? A hero of postal adventure? A weird blip in the history of logistics? Historians still argue what you represent. You just hope someone learned to pack more biscuits. As you drift off, you hear rain tapping gently at the window, and in the distance, the low, familiar rumble of a passing mail cart. You smile. Not because you missed the crate, but because now, no matter what happens, you know exactly what it's like to deliver yourself. You deliver your lecture in a ballroom that smells faintly of polished wood, pipe smoke, and old ink. Lord Barstow insists on calling it a symposium of forward-thinking conveyance, which seems ambitious given the presence of several contraptions made from teapots, bicycle spokes, and one man's ex-wife's piano. Still, the room is packed. Everyone who's anyone in the mildly eccentric movement of alternative logistics is here. Postal reformists, amateur inventors, overly confident puppeteers. You even spot the woman with the shoulder ferret again. This time, the ferret wears goggles. You're dressed in your best waistcoat, which isn't saying much. It still bears a faint crease from your crate days. But Margaret, seated in the second row, assures you it gives you an understated, survived something appeal. You take that as a compliment. Barstow introduces you with a level of dramatic flourish usually reserved for opera tenors or large cakes. He refers to you as the boldest piece of international mail in the empire. Someone claps. Someone else coughs. A monocle pops off a face. It's a strong start. You take the stage, well, the platform, clearing your throat gently. You look out over the crowd, who are already tilting their heads forward like eager pigeons. Ladies, gentlemen, and postal enthusiasts, you begin. Tonight I come to you not as a scholar, not as an engineer, but as a parcel. A man who has been weighed, stamped, and left politely near the Thames. The room laughs. Softly, but warmly. You speak for 25 minutes. You recount the journey, light on the dramatics, heavy on the logistics. You explain the importance of ventilation, the betrayal of hay-base padding, and the unexpected humility found when a goat gives you the side eye. You even unveil a diagram titled Recommended Crate Posture for Medium-Length Transit, with biscuit shelf. Margaret takes notes. Several attendees sketch nervously in notepads, and one man in the back mutters something about revolutionizing the entire umbrella shipping sector. You close your talk with a simple line. What I learned ultimately is that sometimes the shortest distance between 2 points is a box with a dream. Applause follows, tentative at first, then genuine. You step down, cheeks a little warm, and are instantly pulled into a whirl of hands, smiles, and questions like, did you ever consider sea otter delivery? And what brand of flask survived the Channel crossing? Afterward, Margaret finds you near the refreshment table, where you're wrestling with a scone that appears to be held together by academic rigor. You were brilliant, she says. I didn't trip over any shipping terms, so I consider it a success. Though, she adds, you did say ventilated dignity twice. Only twice? She smiles and hands you a small envelope. It's addressed in careful script, sealed with red wax, and curiously, labeled with a postage stamp, though she's handed it to you in person. What's this? A message from your crate, she replies. You open it. Inside is a tiny folded card with a drawing of a wooden box wearing a top hat and monocle. Beneath it, written in Margaret's neat hand, thanks for taking me somewhere. You try not to smile too widely. Fail. That evening, you and Margaret walk along the Thames. The gaslights flicker. The air smells like smoke, river moss, and roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Boats bob gently. The city hums beneath a blanket of quiet noise, the kind that settles into your coat like a second layer of contentment. I've been thinking, you say, stuffing your hands into your coat pockets. About what comes next. Oh? You nod. I've got all these notes. Observations. Sketches. A whole list of things not to pack in confined wooden spaces. She raises an eyebrow. Is one of them a gentleman with long knees? It's number 3. You pause beneath the lamppost, the light casting gold across the wet cobbles. I want to write the whole thing. Not just the trip, but what it meant. The odd kindnesses, the detours, the moment I thought I might perish in a goat barn. I think people would read that, she says. People like stories about boxes. Especially the ones with a person still inside. She reaches into her coat and pulls out something unexpected, your shipping label. The original one. Slightly water-damaged, rumpled at the edges, but still legible. Found it in the depot, she says. Nearly used it to wrap up a bundle of misaddressed hats. But then I saw your name and figured it belonged in better company. You take it gingerly, like an ancient artifact. Which, in a way, it is. Thank you. The wind picks up, nudging her scarf into her face. She laughs and tucks it back into place. The two of you stand there a moment longer, not speaking, letting the city move around you. Historians still argue whether this was the beginning of something larger, between you and Margaret, between you and the idea of movement. The legend, over time, bends a bit. Some say you went on to create a society for ethical crate travel. Others claim you opened a traveling museum exhibit called The Postman Who Posted Himself. But what's certain is that you did write the book. Eventually. It took months, of course. You wrote in cafes, on trains, even once from inside a disused luggage compartment just to get into character. You titled it Contents May Shift, One Man's Journey in a Box. It sold moderately well, then wildly well, then became a surprise hit with postal workers and high school history teachers alike. Your adventures were adapted into a play, then briefly a musical, poorly received, but not without charm. A minor politician once quoted you in Parliament, mistakenly citing you as a naval officer. You didn't correct him. And through it all, you kept the crate. It lives in your study now, beside your writing desk. Occasionally, you store extra socks in it. Sometimes you sit on it and read letters from readers who ask if your story is real. You always reply the same way. Real enough to change how I see the world. One plank at a time. The next spring, you receive a letter with no return address, just a wax seal bearing a squirrel riding a unicycle and the words Official Guild of Unusual Attempts. You unfold it cautiously, wondering whether this is fan mail or another invitation to be crated and catapulted. Inside is a handwritten invitation, no formalities, just a single sentence. You are cordially dared to judge the annual amateur parcel conveyance competition. May contain applause. You blink, then smile. Henri reads over your shoulder and mutters, "They found you." Margaret, who's just arrived with a small basket of fresh pastries and a story about a postal dog that delivers mail in alphabetical order, raises an eyebrow. Parcel conveyance? You nod. Apparently my fame precedes my common sense. 2 weeks later, the three of you arrive at a lush meadow just outside Oxford, where the event is held annually. It's a cross between a village fete and an engineering experiment gone slightly off the rails. There are flags, streamers, several brass bands tuning simultaneously, and a tent labeled emergency plaster and tea. Children in cardboard helmets dart between booths, shouting parcel-related trivia at one another. A woman sells sandwiches shaped like crates. A man nearby offers commemorative postage stamps featuring famous logistical failures. Yours is among them. You take your honorary seat at the judging table, positioned directly beside a modest platform where the contestants are preparing for launch, figuratively and, in some cases, literally. Margaret leans over and murmurs, "Should we be concerned about the trebuchet?" You glance at it. It's painted bright blue and manned by 2 elderly gentlemen in matching waistcoats. One of them is polishing a helmet while the other carefully aligns a crate labeled to Wales. Only slightly, you say? The first contestant rolls forward in what appears to be a bathtub on wheels. She introduces herself as Beatrix and proceeds to explain that her crate is constructed from recycled opera programs and sealed with marmalade. The judges, including yourself, nod solemnly as she is wheeled precisely 1 meter and declared moderately deliverable. Next comes a boy no older than 12 who has crammed himself into a large biscuit tin. The tin wobbles but holds. He emerges to thunderous applause and a slight limp. The crowd loves it. Then there's the ambitious older couple attempting a tandem crate experience, a sort of dual-compartment system connected by a tube for whispered communication. It tips immediately but scores well for coordination and synchronized courage. Historians often debate when the so-called parcel games truly began. Some trace their origins to obscure 17th-century traditions involving barrels and rope bridges. Others credit a bored railway clerk in the 1880s who once mailed himself to his own retirement party. Regardless, the event now stands as one of Britain's most confusing but beloved pastimes. As guest judge, your duties are simple: nod gravely, offer gentle commentary, and award points for creativity, durability, and emotional postage value, a category you invented 5 minutes before the first contestant. By mid-afternoon, the crowd has grown boisterous and generous with applause. You've handed out ribbons labeled Most Impressive Packing Peanut Usage and Least Structural Regret. You even climb into one contestant's crate, at her insistent request, to test for comfort. It smells like cinnamon and misplaced ambition. Then comes the final act. The blue trebuchet. The elderly men are back, proudly rolling forward a crate that looks like it was built by a moderately skilled squirrel with access to fine wood and delusions of grandeur. It's strapped, labeled, and worryingly aerodynamic. The crowd holds its breath. You rise from your seat. Just to clarify, where exactly is this going? One of the men squints at a map. Near Gloucester. Via Arc? Roughly. Winds favorable. Margaret squeezes your arm. You're not liable for this, are you? I signed something earlier, you whisper. It may have been a menu. The crate is launched with what can only be described as rustic enthusiasm. It sails high gracefully, then tilts, then corkscrews, then lands with a dignified thud in a patch of hay 30 yards away. The crate pops open, and a triumphant hand rises holding a flag that reads "Received" with slight delay. The crowd erupts. You raise your clipboard and declare, 10 out of 10 for vertical optimism. Later, as the sun dips low and the brass bands finally agree on a key, you're presented with a trophy, a modest wooden sculpture of a crate on tiny wheels, engraved simply with "To wherever it may concern." Margaret laughs. That's going on your mantel. You nod. Next to the flask and the infamous pillow. That evening you return to London tired, hoarse from laughter, and oddly full of ideas. You've started sketching again, notes for a second book, maybe. Something about what happens after the box. About the joy of absurd community, the curious intimacy of being carried, and how, once you've been delivered by crate, everything else is a bit less fragile. You sit by the fire that night, feet up, Margaret beside you with a half-finished scarf and a mug of something cinnamon-scented. She looks over. Still glad you did it? You glance at the small trophy, the shipping label tacked to the wall, and the neatly folded crate now serving as a quirky side table. Absolutely, you say. Though next time, I'm taking a window seat. She smiles. Next time? You grin. Well, someone needs to test the international canoe postage theory. Historians, of course, are still undecided on what happened next. Some say you retired quietly to the countryside, living off book royalties and tea. Others believe you went on to test every known form of eccentric travel, including balloon post and self-addressed gondola. A few claim they saw your name on a shipping manifest bound for Istanbul, crated beside a harp and 3 crates of lemons. But one thing is certain. Somewhere out there, in the musty archives of a post office or perhaps the overstuffed drawer of a curious librarian, there is still a folder labeled Jacqueline, Lucian, unusual, fragile, handle with curiosity. It is a strange thing to be known primarily for one's relationship with a wooden box. Weeks after the Oxford competition, the novelty of your escapade hasn't worn off, it's simply evolved. You've become a sort of postal folk hero. Strangers recognize you in the street, though they rarely get your name right. To the butcher near Henry's flat, you're Mr. Wooden. To the woman who runs the corner flower stall, you're Monsieur Postable. And at least one child outside the bakery insists you are the box wizard, though you've never claimed magical powers beyond moderate patience. You take it in stride. Fame, after all, is far more enjoyable when it involves pastries and the occasional commemorative postcard. One afternoon, you receive an invitation from a museum. Specifically, the Museum of Modern Transport and Postal Curiosities, tucked behind a bookshop in a quiet part of Clerkenwell. The letter is charmingly enthusiastic and offers tea in exchange for your story, and if you're willing, the crate itself. You discuss it with Henri and Margaret over tea and scones, the latter of which has become a frequent and entirely welcome occurrence. The crate? Margaret says. Your trusty vessel? Your splintered steed? I wouldn't say steed. More like a reluctant companion. Henri smirks. Still, seems a fitting place. It gets its retirement, and you get to reclaim your living room floor. The crate, which has indeed become a hybrid of side table and conversational centerpiece, sits silently in the corner. You glance at it. Do you think it would mind? I think it's earned a glass case, Margaret says. And maybe a small plaque that reads contents once included, courage, curiosity, and one biscuit. And so, a week later, you find yourself standing in the rear hall of the museum beside a curator who wears her spectacles like armor and speaks with the reverence of someone handling ancient scrolls, not half-collapsed pine. This, she says, gently placing her hand on the crate, is history with hinges. The museum staff ask you questions, take measurements, and photograph every scuff and crack. You provide them with a written account, condensed, polite, free of the more vivid goat-related details, and a small diagram of your original packing layout. You even donate your travel pillow, though you insist on cleaning it first. When they ask if you'd like to make a speech at the display's unveiling, you laugh. I've run out of crate jokes. The curator tilts her head. We assumed you had infinite supply. The ceremony is small, attended mostly by postal enthusiasts, museum donors, and a journalist who's written 4 conflicting articles about your journey and is hoping for a 5th. You speak briefly, pose beside the display, and answer a young girl's question about whether you were ever worried the crate might be sent to Antarctica. Terrified, you say, I don't pack well for snow. The crate itself is displayed behind glass, gently lit from above like a sacred artifact. A small sign reads, Parcel number 746, Paris to London. On loan from Monsieur Lucy and Jacquin. Traveled via post in 1904. Used once. Preferred not to repeat. Margaret squeezes your hand. It looks oddly proud. It does. For something that squeaked for most of Calais. You leave the museum feeling lighter, as though by giving the crate a resting place, you've gently closed a chapter. But the story doesn't end there. Shortly after the exhibit opens, letters begin to arrive. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. Some are from children who now dream of mailing themselves to see their grandparents. Others come from postal clerks who recall odd parcels they now suspect were people in disguise. One man writes from Argentina, claiming to have attempted a similar stunt inside a piano crate, only to be mistaken for contraband and shipped back home with a hole drilled in his lid for inspection. You read each letter. Carefully. Respectfully. Occasionally out loud. Some are funny. Some are thoughtful. Some are oddly poetic, like the woman who compared life in a box to her own struggles with anxiety, and said your story gave her permission to think sideways. Margaret helps you sort them. Henri builds you a small cabinet to store the ones you want to keep. It becomes a quiet ritual. Tea, sifting through stories, laughing, underlining sentences. One evening you receive a letter that is different. It's written in shaky script on thick paper, signed simply by Mrs. Ada Humphreys. She's 82, she says, and has never traveled far from her village in Devon. But she read your tale in the local paper, and it sparked something. I once packed my brother into a box when we were children, intending to mail him to our uncle in Edinburgh. We were 7. It was raining. He only made it as far as the pantry. But I never forgot that box. Or what it represented. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes, boxes are not confinements, but vessels. You read the letter twice, then a third time, slower. It sits with you like a pebble in the shoe, not painful, just persistent. The next day, you begin a new chapter in your second book. It's about Ada. And about all the people who never quite climbed into crates, but still understand what it means to be stuck and what it feels like to dream about movement. You call it boxed in, sent out, notes from a traveling parcel. The writing comes easily. The title takes longer. Your days take on a rhythm again. Morning walks, afternoon writing, evening letters. Margaret often reads beside you, her scarf collection now threatening to outnumber your postage stamps. Henri drops by with stories about students who claim to know you from crate lore, which may or may not be a growing part of the curriculum at certain fringe universities. You don't travel much these days. Or at least, not by crate. But you do visit towns when invited. You give gentle talks about problem-solving, misdirection, and how the best travel plans often start with a ridiculous question. At one event, someone asks if you've ever considered repeating the journey. You shake your head. No, you say. But I'm quite flattered the box still gets mail. Because it does. The museum has had to install a dedicated pouch for crate correspondence, and every so often they forward you the best ones, sketches from children, folded maps from dreamers, and a note from someone in Wales who simply wrote, "Dear Box, I hope you're not lonely. Gwen, age 9. You write back, "Dear Gwen." The box is quite content. It says thank you. Lucien, also previously folded. Your second book is published in early autumn, released under a drizzle so gentle it feels almost ceremonial. The cover features a charming illustration of your original crate perched atop a hill, wearing, inexplicably, a small scarf. The publisher insists this personifies the narrative. You don't argue. You rather like it. The reviews are kind, if occasionally baffled. One paper calls it a delightful meditation on personal transport and personal growth. Another hails it as an introspective triumph with surprising postal accuracy. One reviewer admits they weren't sure whether it was a travelogue or a gentle philosophy book, but gave it 5 stars for sheer originality and biscuit content. Sales are modest at first, but steady. Then, once again, something strange happens. A teacher in Yorkshire assigns the book to her literature class. Then a librarian in Brighton builds an entire window display around it, featuring a full-size mock crate with a cutout of your face peeking through. And just like that, it spreads. You receive word that a theatre group in Glasgow is adapting parts of it into a shadow puppet performance. You're unsure whether to be flattered or alarmed, especially when someone sends you a poster advertising the man who folded himself and didn't complain. One morning, Margaret arrives carrying 3 envelopes and a tart. The tart is lemon, she says. The letters are mixed. The first is from a university professor inviting you to speak at a symposium titled Containment and Discovery: Narratives of Voluntary Confinement. You laugh and agree. The second is from a French shipping company asking, politely, if they can use your likeness in a public safety campaign about crate-related travel hazards. You decline. The third is from a boy named Nolan, aged 12, who simply writes, "Dear Mr. Jacquin, did your knees ever forgive you? Also, did you name the crate? I think it should be called Pierre." You write back, "Dear Nolan, my knees and I are currently on speaking terms. The crate was never officially named, but Pierre is dignified. Thank you." Warmly, Lucien J. You spend more time at the museum these days. They've added your crate to a special rotating exhibit titled Enclosed Journeys, Stories from Within. The display now includes audio recordings, one of which is your voice reading aloud excerpts from the first chapter of your book, accompanied by the ambient creak of wood and a faint soundscape of distant hooves. One weekend, a family of 6 stands in front of the case, all staring silently. The youngest girl tugs on your sleeve. "Is this the actual box?" You nod. She looks back at it, eyes wide. "You were inside that?" "Yes," you say gently. It was surprisingly roomy if you don't like standing. Did you have snacks? You grin. I had 2 stale rolls and a flask of broth. She frowns. That's not enough. No, you agree. But I had determination. And marginally breathable air. She nods solemnly and returns to inspecting the crate, as if it might still whisper advice to her. You and Margaret sit on a bench near the museum's side garden afterward. It's a quiet, windless day. Bees hover lazily around the last of the summer blooms. You've become a sort of minor folk hero, she says, sipping tea from a thermos. You shrug. Minor, certainly. She taps your boot with hers. They've even made you into a toy. You blink. What? She pulls a small wooden figure from her bag, a tiny man with a painted waistcoat and a detachable crate accessory. It reads Jacqueline, the gentle parcel. You stare at it. Why do I look so determined? She grins. Marketing. They debated between that and emotionally sturdy. You tuck the toy into your coat pocket and pretend not to be quietly delighted. That evening, at Henry's place, you share the news. A toy? He says, nearly choking on his wine. A toy of you? Of me, you say proudly. With crate. He laughs for a full minute, then sobers. I always knew you'd go far. I just didn't expect you to get there in pieces of pine and with goat-scented socks. Later that night, alone in your own flat, modest, warm, with walls now tastefully decorated in fan sketches and newspaper clippings, you sit by the window and write. Not a book this time. Just a letter. It's addressed to your younger self. You won't send it, of course, but it feels necessary. Dear Lucien, you're going to think this idea is clever. It's not. Not entirely. It's brave. It's inconvenient. It's possibly illegal in some regions. But it will change everything. You will discover how strange the world can be. How generous. How curious. How full of small wonders. And somehow, along the way, people will listen. They'll laugh. They'll write back. You will not be forgotten. So yes. Get in the box. Just, maybe bring more biscuits. With affection. You. You fold the letter and place it in your desk drawer beside the others. It joins hundreds now, a pile of thoughts, thank yous, memories, and musings. Your life is no longer about the box. But you'll never quite escape it, nor would you want to. Because the box gave you something you hadn't expected, a story worth retelling. A journey that wasn't about the distance, but about all the odd, kind, ridiculous things that happened along the way. And perhaps most importantly, it brought you people. Henri, Margaret, Nolan. The museum staff. The girl who worried about your snack supply. The man who mailed himself to his own wedding. The elderly postmistress who once tried to smuggle her dog into Cornwall as seasonal mail. You are, in your own small way, part of something now. A history of misfits and dreamers. Of those who see limits not as barriers but as suggestions. And in that quiet moment, with the city humming outside and your chair creaking gently beneath you, you realize something simple. You were never just a man in a box. You were always a letter, waiting to be opened. You wake one chilly morning to a letter marked Return to Sender. The envelope is old, creased at the corners, and bears your own handwriting on the front, though not recent. It's postmarked from Paris, dated nearly a year ago. You frown, puzzled. You sit by the window, the city still wrapped in morning fog, and carefully open the envelope. Inside is a note addressed to your cousin Felix. You laugh. Felix, the boy who once dragged your human-weighted crate down a Paris alleyway in exchange for a croissant, who wore a cap too big for his head and had a whistle he used far too liberally. You'd sent him a letter weeks after arriving in London, a thank you and an apology for the fact that you probably aged him 5 years that morning. The letter had apparently wandered, perhaps lost beneath a stack of forgotten postcards, or bounced around various postal offices like a very polite ghost, before finding its way back to you. You hold it for a moment, smile, then set it aside. There are better ways to say thank you now. That afternoon, you write him a new letter. Dear Felix, I hope this finds you taller, and that your shoes no longer squeak. Do you remember that morning in Paris? The alley? The crate? I hope you do, because you were the beginning of all of it. The bravery, the breathless start, the part where I realize being carried is not the same as being helpless. I'm in London still. The crate's in a museum now. I'm a little more vertical than I used to be, and I still owe you more than a croissant. Write to me. Tell me everything. Your parcel. Lucien. You send it off with a small book tucked inside. Contents may shift. You inscribe it to him, to my first postal worker. The letter launches another small ripple. A reply from Felix arrives weeks later, written in what is clearly an upgraded penmanship and the delightfully confident voice of a teenage boy who once smuggled a relative into a post office and got away with it. Lucien. I still have the whistle. I tell everyone the story. They don't believe me, but I always finish with the same line. He came back in a book. Maman says she wants to meet you again, but she will make you sleep in a proper bed this time. Come visit. I promise no crates. Felix. You hang the letter on your wall next to a map of all the cities your story has traveled since. That same week, Margaret appears at your door with an unusual object, a stack of envelopes tied together with twine and an air of mystery. These arrived at the depot, she says. Addressed to the crate. You blink. My crate? Your exact crate. Or perhaps any crate. But the return addresses suggest, well, you'd best read them. You set a kettle to boil and begin sorting through the bundle. There are notes from schoolchildren, as expected. Crayon drawings of you with exaggerated limbs climbing out of enormous boxes. One includes a labeled diagram of a crate submarine with a chimney, labeled for steam or dreams. Another is from a man in Norway who writes, I live in a cabin I once built using postal pallets. I read your story and realized I've been building myself a crate this whole time. So, thank you for reminding me to open the door. A letter from a woman in Lisbon includes pressed flowers and a single line. I was in a box once, though mine didn't have wood. It had silence. You helped. You pause with that one. Reread it. You don't speak for a while. Somewhere behind you, the kettle clicks off, forgotten. That night, you and Margaret sit together with a bottle of red wine and read the rest of the letters aloud. Some are silly, others strange. One man claims he once tried to mail himself inside a piano but fell asleep and was delivered instead to a wedding where he briefly joined the band. You make a pile, keep forever, respond soon, needs clarification, mostly for the piano man. Then, for the first time in a long while, you open your notebook again. Not the fresh one. The original. The crate notebook. You flip through the pages, scribbled air hole measurements, biscuit ration charts, sketches of hay-lining techniques, and what appears to be a doodle of a goat in spectacles. You find a blank page, and begin to write. Crates are not always made of wood. Sometimes they're built from routine, from grief, from rules we didn't mean to follow but did anyway. Sometimes, the act of being delivered is simply about choosing to go. About deciding that the walls around us are not fixed, only assembled. And maybe the greatest kindness isn't the person who opens the lid for you, but the one who helps you climb inside in the first place, because they trust you'll know when it's time to come out. You close the notebook. Slide it back into the drawer. The next morning you receive a parcel. A real one. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine, and labeled with calligraphy that reads, To Monsieur Jacquin, still deliverable. Inside is a small model of your crate, perfectly scaled, complete with tiny breathing holes and a working latch. It comes with a note. I made this for a diorama project about unsung heroes. I hope it fits on your desk. Lena, age 11, Bristol. You set it beside your pen jar, next to the wooden toy of yourself. Margaret glances at it during breakfast. You know, she says, you've become the patron saint of self-packaged persistence. Sounds exhausting. She sips her tea. It's charming. And oddly useful. You smile. I'll take it. Later, as you walk the morning streets, coat buttoned, notebook in your pocket, you wonder, not for the first time, how much of your life might have been different had the crate been just a bit too small. Had Felix given up? Had the clerk checked more thoroughly? Had the goat stepped harder? But it wasn't. He didn't. They didn't. And she didn't. And so here you are. Still unfolding. Still delivering. Still received. Spring begins to stretch across London with a kind of hesitant optimism. Trees bud slowly along the avenues, and the Thames finally smells more like water than soot. The streets stall with activity. Market stalls hum with chatter and strawberries that still taste mostly of ambition. You walk more these days. Not far, but far enough. Your crate, your faithful wooden companion, is now the centerpiece of the museum's spring program. They've added a small interactive plaque that plays your voice reading selected passages from your books. A child recently asked whether the crate itself reads bedtime stories, and you're now being gently pressured to record one. You're considering it. One warm Thursday, you and Margaret are invited to an event billed as an evening of eccentric transport, held at a garden in Highgate known for its suspicious number of hedgehogs and gentlemen with monocles. It's the sort of affair where tea is served from teapots shaped like submarines, and someone always arrives on stilts for the drama. You've been asked to speak briefly, again. You do, keeping it light. You open with, "I used to think life was about moving forward. Turns out, you can get pretty far sideways too." Applause. Margaret stands at the back, arms crossed, watching with that soft, sideways smile of someone who once helped mail you out of a warehouse and now carries that moment around like a shared joke. After the event, a woman in a green hat shaped like a blimp approaches you. She's in her 50s, cheerful, eyes bright and curious. "I heard you speak in Oxford last year," she says. "I've been traveling ever since. Not by crate, don't worry, but by foot, by canal, by accident." You laugh. "That last one's my specialty." She nods. "Just wanted to thank you. Your story made me pack my own things. Differently. You don't quite know what to say." You thank her, and she walks off, and you're left staring at the teapot-shaped samovar as it hisses gently beside you, unsure whether you're overwhelmed or simply changed. It occurs to you, again, that your journey no longer belongs only to you. It's been borrowed. Shared. Translated into puppet shows, dioramas, academic papers with titles like Kinetic Solitude and The Politics of Parcelhood. You are, in some small way, folk myth adjacent. And with that comes responsibility, or at least, the occasional polite obligation. You now write a column, monthly, in a publication called The Curious Courier. They give you space to ramble about philosophy, transport, tea etiquette, and the merits of optimism inside small spaces. You call it out of the box, which makes at least 4 editors groan but leave it anyway. The letters continue. One arrives from South Africa, written in blue ink on thick, sun-scented paper. The writer describes how your story convinced them to finally send a manuscript they'd hidden in a drawer for 6 years. It's now a published novella titled Small Spaces, Big Ideas. They dedicate it to L.J., who showed me the air holes are worth the effort. Another is from a prisoner in Yorkshire. The note is short, precise. Your story made me feel less forgotten. Thank you for being delivered. You read that one twice. Then fold it carefully and place it in the drawer marked Keep for rainy days. One evening you and Margaret are walking along the river, coats flapping in a mischievous breeze. The water glows orange with sunset. You're both a bit quiet, not in a tense way, but in the way people are when they've spent enough time together to enjoy silence properly. She finally breaks it. Do you ever miss it? You glance at her. The crate? She nods. Sometimes, you admit. Not the splinters, but the simplicity. There's clarity in choosing a small space and trusting that movement will still happen. She links her arm with yours. You don't need a box for that anymore. I know. You stop beside a street performer singing a sea shanty, mostly in tune. A child dances nearby with wild abandon, clapping with 2 hands full of crumbs. The scene is oddly perfect. You pull something from your pocket. It's the first page from your original crate notebook, now laminated and slightly yellowed from time. You keep it with you, not to read, but just to feel. She notices. Still carrying that old scrap? You nod. Part of the kit now. Like a passport. Except it only gets me places in memory. You head back to your flat as the wind picks up, promising rain tomorrow. Inside, everything is comfortably cluttered. The wall by your desk now holds a map of crates attempted globally, a project started by schoolchildren in Wales. Colored pins mark every confirmed, or at least rumored, instance of someone mailing themselves since your own infamous journey. There are more than 30. You write a letter that night. Not to anyone in particular. Just a general note, tucked into the back of your drawer for someday. To the next person thinking of climbing into something small and strange. It will not make sense. People will laugh. You will be deeply uncomfortable. And yet, if your reason is kind, and your heart honest, and your biscuits not too crumbly, you might just get where you need to be. Sign. Still unfolding. Lucian. You seal it with red wax. Stamp it with a squirrel riding a bicycle, Margaret's idea. You don't sleep early that night. Instead, you sit by the fire, toes tucked under a blanket, a book open but ignored. You listen to the creak of the house, the faint tick of the clock, the sigh of wind against the windowpane. London moves outside, as it always does. But you've learned something remarkable. That movement doesn't always require motion. That stories, once released, do their own wandering. And that sometimes you're the box. Sometimes the letter. And sometimes you're simply the string that ties them gently together. Summer begins its slow golden sprawl across London. Shopkeepers open early with smiles too wide for Monday mornings. The air carries the scent of dusty books, warm pavement, and something sweet you can't quite name, likely a cart full of overambitious tarts melting slightly in the sun. You've started taking your tea in the park, beneath the same sycamore where you once read the very first letter addressed to the man who mailed himself. Now the bench bears a small brass plaque, placed there by someone without asking, which reads, "Reserved for travelers of improbable routes." You love it. Some days you're joined by Margaret, who brings 2 mugs, hers full of mint, yours perpetually too hot, just the way you like it. On other days children drift by, recognize you from a school reading, and whisper as if you're part exhibit, part folklore. One child, a boy with a face that suggests he's already working on 3 inventions and a dessert, marches up boldly. "Did you really ride a goat cart?" You nod. "Was it terrifying?" "Only when they started singing." He considers that. Nods sagely. "I'm designing a rocket made from jam jars. I see no flaws in that plan." He beams and runs off, presumably to build it or accidentally start a fire. Later, you stop by the museum. The crate is getting a seasonal polish. One of the attendants waves at you like an old friend, which she is, and lifts the velvet rope so you can step closer. You run your fingers gently along the grain of the wood. It's aging well, dignified, much like yourself, you hope. The newest addition to the exhibit is a touchscreen display that plays interviews with other self-mailers. There's a man in Lisbon who once shipped himself 3 blocks just to test the system. A woman from Perth who snuck onto a cargo plane in a crate labeled delicate potatoes and now teaches seminars on escape artistry. One small screen plays a loop of you reading from your first chapter. You cringe slightly at your own voice, then smile. It sounds less uncertain now. Like someone who has lived inside their own metaphor and made peace with the lighting. A staff member quietly approaches. "There's been a request," she says. You turn. She hands you an envelope. Cream paper. Gold ink. You raise an eyebrow. "Do I need to RSVP to something dangerous?" She laughs. "Not dangerous. Just peculiar." Inside is a neatly typed letter from the British Rail Historical Society. They're hosting an exhibition on unconventional travel. "Would you," they ask politely, "be willing to ride a replica mail coach?" "Just once. Just for demonstration. Crate optional," the letter adds. You chuckle and tuck the invitation into your coat. Margaret, you say that evening over dinner, how do you feel about reenactments? She doesn't look up from her pudding. Do I get to wear a hat? Most definitely. A week later, the two of you stand beside a restored Victorian mail coach, horses pawing at the ground like they, too, are skeptical of this entire endeavor. Dozens of attendees mill about, most carrying programs titled Postage in Motion, from letter to legend. You're asked to climb aboard? Should I get in the crate? You joke. The event coordinator, without missing a beat, says only if you feel emotionally boxed in. You like her. The ride is brief but joyful. The coach creaks and clatters down a closed-off cobblestone route while people wave as if royalty were passing. You sit high on the bench beside the driver, Margaret beside you, your coat fluttering behind you like it has somewhere important to be. Children run alongside. A man plays a trumpet. Someone in the crowd shouts, "Where's the cheese?" And you salute solemnly. At the end of the route, you're asked to give a short speech. You stand atop a small wooden crate, because of course you do, and clear your throat. I never expected to become a traveling metaphor, you begin. But it turns out people like the idea that one can choose to be delivered. That we're not always stuck. That we can, if necessary, pack ourselves up and declare, to somewhere better, please. You pause. The air is still. Attentive. And sometimes, somewhere better isn't far away. Sometimes it's a park bench. A letter. A story. A very good tart. Sometimes it's someone beside you who says, "I'll help you out of the box when you're ready." The applause is more than polite. It's warm. Genuine. A round of clapping that says we've all been crated, in our own way. That night, you and Margaret stroll home by lamplight, shoes scuffing gently along the path. She nudges you. Still feel famous? Not famous, you say. Just delivered. A breeze picks up. Leaves scurry ahead of you like they know a secret. At home, you open a letter that's arrived during your outing. It's addressed to Monsieur Jacquin, currently upright. Inside is a simple note from a student in Edinburgh. Our class read your book. We wrote stories about the boxes we carry. Mine's full of expectations. But I think I'm ready to unpack it. Thank you for reminding us we're all just trying to find the right address. You pin it above your desk. Margaret joins you at the table with 2 cups of tea and one final envelope. She holds it out. From your publisher. You groan. Another request for a sequel? Not quite. You open it. Inside is a single page. Dear Lucien, we'd like to adapt your story into a radio series. Narrated by you, if you're willing. Think, gentle humor, soft pacing, a voice to fall asleep to. Working title, The Man in the Crate. You sit quietly. Margaret smiles. I always said you had a soothing voice. You glance around the room. At the stack of letters. The soft light. The tiny crate model on the windowsill. Your life, pieced together from wood, wit, and words. I suppose, you say, I wouldn't mind being the voice that helps people rest. Margaret raises her cup. To sleepy stories and slow arrivals. You clink mugs. And outside, somewhere in the city, the last postman of the day whistles a tune that sounds oddly like possibility. The radio series launches quietly, like a whisper rather than a fanfare. No billboards, no dramatic trailer, no overenthusiastic announcer with a booming voice declaring, "This summer, one man, one crate, one reckless journey." Instead, it begins with the gentle strike of a match. A soft hum of background sound, tea pouring, rain tapping at a window, the creak of floorboards. And then your voice. Calm. Measured. More amused than grand. Hello? I'm Lucien. And once, I mailed myself across a border in a wooden box. This is the story of how I got there, what I saw along the way, and how, if you're lucky, you just might fall asleep before the goat shows up. You record from a small studio tucked behind a bookshop in Soho. The walls are padded with thick blue foam and covered in handwritten notes like softer on page 3, and try not to laugh at your own jokes. Margaret sits just outside with a cup of coffee and a red pencil, occasionally sliding in edits or raising one eyebrow when your pacing strays into excitable baguette salesman territory. The episodes air weekly. Each covers a chapter, a moment, a memory. You speak softly, not like a lecturer or performer, but like someone remembering aloud. You describe the feel of straw against your back, the rhythm of cobblestones beneath the crate, the smell of slightly burnt goat cheese. Listeners seem to love it. Letters pour in, not just fan mail, but thank you notes. People listen before bed, on trains, in hospital rooms, curled up on old sofas with cats who disapprove of everything except your voice. One woman writes, "I haven't slept through the night in years. But your story? I never make it past the first 6 minutes. I think that's the best compliment I've ever given." You read it aloud to Margaret. She nods. "You've become the bedtime voice of Europe." You say that like I've peaked. You peaked the moment you survived the channel with one stale biscuit and a thermos. She's not wrong. By episode 5, the museum begins hosting listening nights. Visitors sit in a softly lit room on pillows and benches, the crate glowing gently behind glass, while your voice drifts out from a hidden speaker. They call it the parcel hour. A child falls asleep during one session and drops a biscuit directly into a display case. The museum staff leave it there for 2 days, labeling it speculative ration, exhibit adjacent. And yet, even with all the new attention, radio interviews, sleep-inducing awards, and a Dutch translation of your book that mistakenly refers to you as luggage prophet, your daily life remains mostly unchanged. You still walk the city in the mornings. Still fold letters neatly at your desk. Still pause by the museum now and then, nodding at your old crate as if to say, "Still here?" Good. One crisp September afternoon, a telegram arrives. A real one. Paper, typed in all caps, every sentence sounding like a secret being shouted politely. "Mr. Jacquin, stop. Your presence requested, stop. Travel unusual but safe, stop. Dress for cool weather, stop. Love from Felix, stop." You grin? Felix, now apparently grown into both his shoes and his sense of drama, is summoning you to Paris. He provides no further details. Just an address, a date, and the implied promise of mild chaos. You pack lightly. A coat, a scarf, a notebook, and tucked into your inside pocket, the original crate sketch, the one you'd made during the planning stages, labeled top, bottom, and inexplicably, emergency biscuit panel. Margaret offers to come, but you shake your head. "I suspect this is a cousin sort of thing." She nods, but slips a thermos of strong tea into your bag and says, "Text me if there are any more goats." You take the train. The proper way this time. Legs extended, tea warm, no wood pressing into your ribs. You glance occasionally at your fellow passengers, half expecting someone to recognize you, but no one does. Or if they do, they say nothing, just nod and return to their books, which feels somehow better. Paris smells like it always does, like sugar, smoke, and a bit of historical exhaustion. You navigate the metro with the confidence of someone who once braved border inspection in total darkness. Felix meets you outside a building that looks like it once held secrets, and now holds mild administrative paperwork. He's taller, confident, and dressed like someone who reads too many detective novels. "You came," he says, clapping you on the shoulder. "Your telegram made it sound like I'd missed the Second French Revolution." "It's more exciting than that," he says, grinning. "Come on." He leads you down a narrow alley, through a courtyard, up a staircase with steps that sigh beneath each footfall. Then he opens a door and gestures grandly. Inside is a room. A large one. Dusty, yes, but lined with crates. Wooden crates. Dozens. Some old, some new. Some open, others sealed. All meticulously labeled. You blink. "What is this?" "A museum," he says. "In progress. For unusual objects. Stories that don't belong in traditional archives. I convinced the city to give us the space. And I want you to help me build it." You turn slowly. The shelves stretch high. A small chalkboard leans against one crate, reading because some stories aren't flat. He hands you a key. It's small. Rusty. This one's for you. Your own display. Whatever you want to put in it. Could be a biscuit. Could be your boots. Could be a recording of you saying, "Never again" in 5 languages. You stare at him. You built a museum for eccentric objects? He shrugs. I had an excellent role model. You smile. A real one. The kind that starts in your chest and works its way up. Let's begin, you say. And so, in a quiet corner of Paris, beneath old beams and between walls that once held nothing but echoes, you begin to build a museum. One crate at a time. Because some stories deserve to stand. And others? Deserve to be carried. By winter, the museum has a name. Le Musée des Histoires Portables. The Museum of Portable Stories. Felix insists on painting the sign himself, despite possessing handwriting that looks like a goose was briefly given a paintbrush and a mission. The letters are uneven, bold, and entirely perfect. The museum becomes a curious sort of destination. Not famous, exactly, but whispered about. People show up not because they saw it on a brochure, but because someone told them, quietly, you need to see the crate place. And so they do. They come with memories and oddities. A woman donates a suitcase filled with the postcards her grandfather wrote to a woman he never married. A retired circus performer brings a trapeze glove worn during a disastrous but memorable mid-air marriage proposal. One man drops off a lunchbox filled with notes he wrote to himself during the years he didn't speak out loud. Each exhibit has a small plaque. Some describe events. Others simply ask questions. What did you keep in your box? How long did you stay there? What did it take to open the lid? Your own corner of the museum begins with your crate, of course. It now sits beneath a sign that reads, Parcel number 746. The self-mailed man contents, curiosity, crumbs, courage. Next to it is the model crate from young Lena in Bristol, the thermos Margaret packed for your second journey, and your original travel pillow, now fully forgiven, if slightly deflated. The radio series is piped gently through a hidden speaker. People sit, listen, and sometimes stay for hours. A bench sits nearby with a plaque that simply says, "Feel free to rest." You begin spending more time in Paris, your London flat still waiting, still full of books and letters, but these days you split your life between the two cities. It feels right. One foot in each story. Margaret visits often. On her first trip, she brings an entire suitcase full of tea and scarves and declares she's here to add class and confuse the postal system. Felix greets her with exaggerated formality. "Mademoiselle, do you bring credentials?" "I brought a lemon tart," she replies. He steps aside. The museum welcomes you. The three of you fall into a new rhythm. Days spent arranging shelves, cataloging stories, answering odd questions from visitors. Has anyone ever tried to mail a full orchestra? And curating the next temporary exhibit, journeys that shouldn't have worked. You design the signage. One evening, while the museum is closed and the windows fog gently with the breath of memory, you find a man sitting outside. Middle-aged, wrapped in a long coat, staring up at the building with a look that could only be described as uncertain nostalgia. You step out quietly. "We're closed tonight, but we open again tomorrow." He looks up. "I used to be in a crate." You blink. "Did you now?" "Back in '89. I was dared. Got as far as Luxembourg. Still have back problems." You nod, smile. "Would you like to leave something behind?" He considers. Pulls out a folded paper napkin. On it, a drawing of the crate. Not yours. His. Signed, Paul, Luxembourg, 1989. You take it gently. "It'll go next to mine." He smiles, sighs, stands. "Thanks for keeping the lids open." The museum becomes that kind of place. A sanctuary for the almost forgotten. For strange starts and surprising ends. For misdirected people and the moments they carried with them. People leave things behind. A brass button from a coat worn during a runaway train ride. A recipe for panic cookies, created by someone who mailed themselves to a pie contest. A scrap of wood from a boat labeled technically legal. You begin writing again. Not for a book, not even for radio, just reflections. Scribbles on postcards you never send. You pin them to your wall like gentle reminders. One reads, "It turns out, I was never alone in the box. The world was there with me, waiting to be remembered." Another says, "Sometimes the story isn't the journey. Sometimes it's what people do after hearing it." On the museum's anniversary, a crowd gathers for an evening event. Tea is served. Candles flicker in sconces. Someone reads aloud from a journal entry found inside a boot that had crossed 3 borders tied to a donkey named Clive. At the end of the night, Felix brings out a surprise, a guest book. Not just for signatures, but for confessions. Observations. "Thanks." He hands it to you. You read through the first few pages. "I once hid in a cupboard for 2 years. Today I stepped outside and came here first. My brother used to read me the crate story. He's gone now. I came to feel near him. I work in logistics. This reminded me why I do. I didn't expect to cry in front of a plank of pine, but here we are." You close the book. Feel its weight in your hands. It's heavier than it looks. That night, you sit beside your exhibit and take out your notebook. The old one. Pages soft from age and retelling. You begin a new entry. Not to plan, not to outline, just to acknowledge. "Dear Crate. You were never the destination. Just the container. The vessel that taught me I could move, quietly, foolishly, bravely. Thank you for the silence, the surprise, the survival. For the long days, the bruised elbows, the slightly fermented apple. You carried more than me. You carried a story." Margaret finds you there, half asleep beside your own legend, and gently drapes her scarf over your shoulders. "You always fall asleep when you get philosophical," she whispers. "It's the wood grain," you murmur. "It hypnotizes." She smiles. "Come on. Home." And you go, slowly, coat wrapped tight, scarf trailing. Past the bench. Past the door. Past the crate that once held your whole story, and now holds everyone's. By the second winter, the museum has grown, not outward, but inward. Deeper, richer, stranger. Visitors now bring more than just trinkets. They bring time. One man spends 3 hours just sitting beside the letters never sent display, reading folded papers with ink smudges and no names. A woman from Prague arrives with a violin case she never opens, places it gently on a shelf, and says only, "It was with me when I left." A small child solemnly donates a shoebox full of marbles and whispers, "They rolled all the way through the move." You begin to understand that the museum isn't really about crates, or packages, or peculiar travel choices. It's about what we carry, even when we don't mean to, and what we choose, one day, to set down. One particularly gray morning, Felix bursts into your reading nook holding a scroll, a baguette, and an expression that suggests either good news or immediate evacuation. "They've nominated us," he says breathlessly. You look up. "Nominated? For an award. A real one. Musicurix de l'année." He unfurls the scroll with unnecessary drama. "Apparently we're considered a meaningful contribution to the preservation of non-traditional memory." He pauses. "Also, they like the biscuit shelf." You smile. Everyone likes the biscuit shelf. The ceremony is in Avignon, held in a converted library where pigeons cohabit with academics. Margaret insists you all attend. "Recognition is nice," she says, tucking a brooch into her scarf. "Besides, I've never seen a librarian duel a pigeon. Feels worth the trip." The 3 of you take the train south, the countryside a blur of frost and cows. Felix wears a vest with too many buttons. Margaret packs enough wool for a hypothetical glacier. You bring only a notebook, a pen, and a letter you've never quite had the courage to send. It's addressed to yourself. The ceremony is understated, in the way only French award ceremonies can be understated, and still includes 6 types of cheese. Your museum doesn't win. The prize goes to a traveling exhibit about hats that changed history. No one is upset. In fact, you're relieved. You wouldn't have known where to put a trophy anyway. On the way back, Felix naps with his mouth slightly open, and Margaret rests her head on your shoulder. You look out the window at a river bending like a ribbon through fields and think, quietly, I was meant to be somewhere else. I just didn't know where until I arrived. Back in Paris, a new edition arrives for the museum. It's a large wooden sign, a bit warped with age, painted in familiar blue. You freeze when you see it. It reads, Expedition Postal, Fragile, Paris, Londres. Stamped in the exact corner where your own crate once bore its label. Felix found it at an auction. I figured, he shrugs, you should have a reminder that your madness had paperwork. You run your fingers along the letters. The paint is flaking, but the journey still lingers in it. The smell of dust and hope. The sign goes above the door to the new wing, transit proof. A space for temporary exhibits, shifting stories, moments that won't stay boxed. You decide to make the first one yourself. It's titled, Not Quite Lost, Objects Almost Forgotten. The display includes a glove with no pair and a note, held someone once. Don't remember who. A train ticket from a trip never taken. Your own tea-stained handkerchief from the Calais crossing. And in the final glass case, a mirror with a caption, Sometimes the thing we forget is ourselves. The exhibit draws quiet crowds. Some laugh softly. Others weep. One teenage boy stares at the mirror for nearly 10 minutes before saying, to no one in particular, I think I've been carrying too much. And then he walks away lighter. You begin to understand something else. It isn't just about what fits in a box. It's about what doesn't. The weight of a look. The sound of being misunderstood. The ache of a goodbye with no ceremony. The museum fills slowly with those too. You keep a drawer in your desk labeled Unexplainables. It holds a single feather, a torn playing card, and a photograph of two shadows without the people who made them. People ask if you'll write another book. You always say maybe. But one night, when the wind howls so fiercely it rattles the windows like someone's knocking from history, you sit down with your tea, your pen, and a new page. You write. Once upon a time, a man got into a box. He thought he was leaving one life for another. But what he found, rattling quietly in the corners, wasn't escape. It was clarity. And that, it turns out, is sometimes all the travel you need. The words sit gently on the page. You do not rush them. You add one more line, almost without thinking. You are not where you started. And that is reason enough to rest. Outside, the streetlights hum softly, and the world spins, quiet, ridiculous, lovely. You close the notebook. Not finished. Just enough for tonight. The last story you add to the museum before the year ends is one of your own, but you don't label it as such. It's a single envelope, placed in a frame, sealed but unaddressed. Inside is a folded piece of paper that says only, "This was the moment I stopped waiting for permission." Visitors pause at it. Some linger. A few whisper things to themselves, as if the envelope might answer back. But no one asks whose story it is. It doesn't matter. It belongs to everyone who's ever chosen the first step. The holidays arrive in their usual chaotic charm. The museum fills with candles and cinnamon air. Someone donates a crate filled entirely with hand-knit scarves from 20 countries. A volunteer strings fairy lights through the slats of your original box. Margaret insists you wear a sprig of holly on your lapel. So people don't forget you're secretly festive, she says. You do. She's right. On the morning of the new year, you unlock the museum early. The streets are hushed, blanketed in frost. It's the kind of day that feels suspended, as if time itself is unsure whether to begin again just yet. You light the lamps one by one, your footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. You pass the exhibit about misaddressed postcards, the shelf of belongings returned after decades, and the quiet case that holds nothing but a pair of empty gloves and the label, "He promised he'd be back." She never unpacked. You stop, as always, at your crate. You place a fresh sprig of lavender inside, a small, fragrant offering. Then you sit beside it on the bench with no cushion, just wood and memory. The museum won't open for hours. But you're not here to work. You're here to say goodbye. Not to the museum. Not to the story. To the need for arrival. Because, as it turns out, there is no grand destination. Just a series of stops. Chapters. Curves in the road. And each time you think you've landed, something shifts, softly, strangely, and you begin again. You never sent that letter to your younger self. But now, as you sit with the past physically shelved around you, you no longer need to. You've lived it. And it's time to begin again, without boxes this time. Or perhaps with new ones. Different shapes, different meanings. Not all boxes are wooden. Some are conversations. Some are jobs. Some are ideas we wear too tightly until we finally outgrow them. You pull a notebook from your coat. Not the old one. A clean one. The first page reads, "Things to carry next." And beneath it you write, the sound of someone realizing they're allowed to take up space. The soft thunk of a crate closing behind you, not fearfully, but firmly. A teacup full of laughter. A window crack just enough for the breeze. The memory of biscuits, badly packed but bravely shared. You close the book. Stand. Exhale. And for the first time in years, you don't feel like you're narrating a journey. You feel like you're simply walking. That afternoon, a school group visits. Dozens of curious feet, voices bouncing off the walls, hands pointing and eyes wide. A boy with glasses and a wool cap stops at your crate. He leans in and whispers something only you hear. "Did it hurt being boxed?" You crouch beside him. "Only until I realized I wasn't stuck." He nods. "Cool." You show him where the air holes were, where the wood rubbed raw, where you taped a single apple core for luck. He listens. Really listens. Then he says, "I think I'd like to try something strange one day." You grin. "Good. Just pack snacks." Later, you sit in the garden behind the museum, wrapped in your scarf and a cup of Margaret's ginger tea. She joins you without a word, hands tucked in her pockets, breath visible in the air like slow, thoughtful ghosts. The sky turns orange. Then lavender. Then deep, endless blue. "I'm thinking of retiring," you say finally. Margaret doesn't flinch. "From what? Being yourself?" "From the interviews. The readings. The professional oddity circuit. Just living instead." She nods. "That's allowed. I want to write quietly again. Maybe about small things. Nothing dramatic. Just the way bread feels when it cools. The joy of an empty inbox. The sound of someone unlocking a door from the inside. That," she says, "sounds like the perfect story." A few weeks later, you begin recording your final season of the radio show. Not because the story ends, but because you want to give it a chance to rest. The last episode is titled Arrival. You record it late at night, alone in the studio, candle flickering beside the mic. You speak slowly. Not because you're tired, but because the words have weight now. Like a coach you finally grew into. You end with, "To everyone listening, may your travels be gentle. May your crates be well built. May your exits be just as bold as your entrances. And if you ever find yourself packed tightly, between choices, between one life and the next, know that you are still deliverable." The last sound is the creak of the crate's lid closing, and then, after a moment, opening again. Softly. Like breath. Like morning. And now, dear listener, we come gently to rest. Your eyes may already be heavy. Your thoughts, perhaps, drifting in slow circles, like soft leaves settling atop still water. So let's leave Lucien there, just for tonight, beneath the stars, beside his quiet museum, a man no longer boxed in by anything but memory and a very comfortable scarf. The crate waits in stillness, not as a prison, not even as a relic, but as a symbol of something braver than adventure, vulnerability, choice. The kind of courage that doesn't shout, but simply knocks once, and climbs in. The world is full of stories like that. Yours too. Not every journey needs distance. Sometimes, it's enough to sit still with your thoughts, to feel the shape of your own quiet, to let go of whatever weight you've been quietly carrying. So as you lie there, safe and warm, maybe imagine yourself as a parcel, gently wrapped, patiently labeled, to somewhere peaceful, please. Let your breath soften. Let the crate of your worries stay closed for now. There's time to unpack them later. And just for this moment, let it all be simple. A man. A box. A journey with no rush, and no need to arrive. You are already where you need to be. So breathe in, slowly. And out, even slower. Let the story blur. Let sleep take the pen. And let the last thing you feel be this. You are carried. You are cared for. You are home.